folks. I'd like to call the Governance and Priorities Committee meeting to order. Good afternoon and welcome to the May 13th Governance and Priorities Committee meeting. I'd like to first recognize that we are on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk today is Ms. Gurry. Today's Governance and Priorities Committee meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter and Council Procedure Bylaw 2018 number 7272. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, please write down your name and the agenda item on the question period sign-up sheet, which is on the table by the double doors to my left. Please note that questions are for agenda items only. Before we start the meeting, I'd like to take a few moments to remind those who are attending in person about the rules of decorum for all council and committee meetings. A meeting of council is intended to be a place where democracy can freely take place in a respectful and safe manner. The council chambers is a workplace, and there are considerations council and staff must make to ensure that safe work environments exist in accordance with WorkSafe BC regulations. To support this, respectful conduct will not be tolerated. Disrespectful conduct will not be tolerated, so we ask that there will be no cheering, jeering, or other outbursts from the gallery at any time. This will ensure that anyone speaking, whether it be a delegation, member of council, or staff, is not interrupted and can make their point freely without distraction of fear or ridicule. In instances where a speaker is being inappropriate or has exceeded their time limit, their microphone will be cut off. Similarly, there are outbursts of any person in the gallery. They will be asked to stop, and if they do not comply, they may be asked to leave as permitted under Section 133 of the Community Charter. If necessary, council may call a recess in order to reset the environment of the council chambers. It is our belief that if everyone is respectful of these basic considerations, this meeting and future meetings will be more effective in furthering the business of the City of Nanaimo. The first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. For late items this afternoon, we have for 6A1, agenda item 6A1, which is Geotechnical Guidelines Review. We're adding a PowerPoint presentation titled An Introduction to Updated and New Geotechnical Guidelines. As well, we are adding delegations from Kelsey Chandler and Kaylee Baker, as well as Barry Lysing, and that's to agenda item 6B1, allocation of unallocated pedestrian funds. And that's it, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Gurry. And could we get a motion for the adoption of the agenda as amended? Moved by Councillor Armstrong, second by Councillor Hemmons. All in favor? Agenda adopted. Can we get a motion for the adoption of the minutes as circulated? Moved by Councillor Eastmere and seconded by Councillor Hemmons. All in favor? Motion carried. That brings us to agenda planning, upcoming topics and initiatives. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you again, Chair. For the upcoming topics and initiatives, the topics page is on your agenda. For the meeting on Wednesday, June 12th, which was originally scheduled for June the 10th, Chair, at our regular GPC time, but there is the FCM convention that is happening the weekend prior, so we are looking to not have to cancel this date. And scheduled for now, we have the alternative approval process, which was the review and discussion of policy options that was previously discussed and requested by this committee and council to have put forward to a future GPC. As well, on June 24th, the scheduled GPC, we have the Public Works Yard, so discussion regarding options for funding, which was again a February 12th, 2024 motion of council. So that is scheduled to be put forward to the June 24th GPC. Future GPC topics with dates to be announced, as requested by council, are listed. We have city plan monitoring committees, school zone policy update, and incentives that support city plan. So all of those are to be determined with the dates. And tentative GPC topics coming forward are the e-mobility strategy phase 1 and the DPA8 form and character design guidelines. So as you can see outlined, the new green highlighting is to represent integrated action plans, those items coming forward from the integrated action plan. And in the white, those are staff initiatives that would require council to vote tentatively if they would like those to come forward to a future GPC meeting. So unless council has any questions, we could vote on those tentative GPC topics at the next GPC, as the only tentative date scheduled is July 15th and then October 28th. So there's no need for a decision right now on those ones. But if council, if the committee has any requests or alterations, now would be the appropriate time.
Thank you, Ms. Gurry. Councillor Armstrong. Got it.
No, oh, thank you. Yes, I would like to move the Wednesday AAP process. Neither myself or Councillor Brown can be there. We can't do Wednesday mornings, as Council's aware, that it's very difficult for us to make those meetings. And as we're the two that voted against APPs, and also it was one of my requests to have that discussion, I would like that moved to a different date and time.
Motion is on the table.
Yeah, I'll make that motion.
Okay. Seconded by Councillor Hemmons. Any discussion? Councillor Armstrong.
Even if it was to move to an evening, like a Wednesday night meeting or another Monday or a Tuesday or a Thursday, that's fine, but we can't make the days.
Okay, any other discussion from council members or the mayor? Mayor Krogh.
Thank you very much, Chair. For what it's worth, I'm not attending FCM, but I'm coming back from the holiday and had anticipated a meeting on Monday. I'm quite happy to leave it on the Monday, but I appreciate Ms. Gurry's advice about how it might be challenging for those returning from FCM.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Armstrong.
Yeah, I think if it went to a Monday evening, that'd be fine, but I can't do the day because I am driving back Monday during the day, but I have commitments already on the Wednesday.
Okay. So the motion is to move it to
To
Mr.
Chair,
Lindsay.
can I just suggest that if the desire is to have an evening meeting, you can leave it with staff to find a time that week that works, but so either Wednesday or Thursday, depending on availability of this room and other meetings that are scheduled. So we direct staff to move it from the proposed date of, we have the 12th,
Yeah.
June 12th, to an evening meeting that week,
Aaron can't do it.
any night that week.
So are we good potentially to leave it, the motion is to leave it to staff to find a date that'll work?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Chair, I believe the motion on the floor right now is just to not proceed with it that morning. So if that motion passes, obviously we will come back with alternative dates. And I'm not sure if any date would get all members of the committee at the meeting, but this is a committee topic which will then be forwarded to council for your final decision, just to keep that in mind as well.
Okay, thank you. So there's no guarantee that everybody will be here, but staff will reschedule in an evening going forward. So call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you.
This is the opportunity to potentially include other tentative GPC topics, or we can leave it, as staff said, for another date. Not seeing anybody jumping to the mic to do that, so we'll circle back later.
Right here.
Oh, I see Councillor Eastmere's name appear.
Thank you.
Councillor Eastmere.
Thank you. No, I wanted to raise that potentially the conversation we're having today about the unallocated pedestrian budget, I I see as a future topic, there's the school zone policy update. I think that what we get into today may end up warranting a longer conversation about how we address pedestrian projects and the unallocated thing, but I'll leave that until we have that discussion today, and perhaps it'll just naturally come up as a future topic, so thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Eastmere. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. Yeah, another topic that I thought about was when we were at the RDN, we had the presentation from the group from Nanus. I thought that was excellent, and perhaps maybe to have them come to a GPC where we could ask like questions pertaining just to the city and as how they see the budgeting process might be a suggestion just to think about, because got a lot of support from a lot of people, and a lot of what they said made sense. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any more speakers, so we'll carry on. Next item on the agenda is reports, and that brings us to Green Nanaimo Geotechnical Guideline Review. Director Jeremy Holm.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to you and the committee. Happy to be here to present Geotechnical Guideline Review information for committee. We have in attendance here to present Carl Miller, who's been assisting us with that, and the guideline update you're going to hear about really helps to address the information requirements related to appropriately investigating and mitigating hazardous conditions in support of development applications. And we have Claire Negrin here. Ms. Negrin's the subdivision manager and deputy approving officer as well, who's been leading the project, as well as Dean Mousseau in the back, but he's been integral in this project as well. Dean's the manager of development engineering and environmental protection, and yeah, happy to present that. I'll turn it over to Ms. Negrin, who will say a few words before turning it to Mr. Miller. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I just do want to introduce Carl. Carl Miller is the Senior Principal Geotechnical Engineer with WSP here in Nanaimo. He's really the brains in this operation. He's drafted these guidelines for us with input from staff such as Dean Mousseau and myself, as well as other staff. We're presenting two sets of guidelines for your review. Staff are recommending that the Governance and Priority Committee recommend to Council that the guidelines are endorsed for use here in the city. The two guidelines we're presenting are the guidelines for the preparation of geotechnical reports and the guidelines for the geotechnical assessment above abandoned mine workings. The goal of this geotechnical guideline review was twofold. The first was to update and modernize the existing guidelines that are being used here in the city, bring them up to date with current professional practice guidelines for engineers, and to make the guidelines better reflect our current development approval processes. This document will guide those professionals who prepare geotechnical reports required for all stages of the development approval process, and it lays out the city's expectations for what content is expected in those reports. And the second goal was to develop a new set of guidelines for geotechnical assessments above abandoned mine workings. These guidelines are associated with the new Abandoned Mine Workings Hazards Development Permit Area, which was created through the city plan process in 2022. Carl will describe why it's important to have these guidelines available for geotechnical engineers practicing in Nanaimo. So with that, I will hand it off to Carl. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, so thank you for being here. It's really just to introduce these guidelines and be available to field any questions that you might have regarding the update and the contents of the update. Does that go there? Where does it go? Okay. So as Claire mentioned, there's two guidelines. The geotechnical report is really an update. The original documents were prepared, Brian Mahaffey, back in 2006, dusted off in 2013, but they're somewhat wanting in terms of the overall process that we have in development. And then the second set that we'll talk to is these new abandoned mine workings. It's not unique to Nanaimo, but it's a fairly specialized topic. And certainly over the years, we've seen practitioners from outside town coming in, not being fully aware. So this sets some historical context, some background, so that things aren't overlooked because it's a fairly specialized field. So these are the original and current guidelines. There's two sets. One's called Building Inspection Department, one's called Subdivision. They're actually identical, apart from those two words. And within those guidelines, there are some, what I would call difficulties. They don't fully capture, in my mind, the sort of the full development process. We go from rezoning, we may have development permit area issues, we may have subdivisions, we may have building permits. Each need different degrees of detail, different reporting requirements. The current guidelines were really prepared, I believe, in support of building permits, and they're very specific in their mandate, and they don't fully cover the things that we now need to consider more broadly. They include areas of requirements that are quite outside geotechnical engineering. At the moment, we would be asked as geotechnical engineers to comment on all civil design aspects, which, so there's a number of areas that weren't particularly relevant to those guidelines. The design criteria, again, well-intentioned, but technically not correct, and that causes some difficulties in having to process and adhere to the current guidelines. For instance, the return hazard on natural hazards, the return period on natural hazards, and the various other things are out of line with current practice. And one of the things that we've tried to introduce in terms of sort of sustainability is the concept that, things don't stay the same. You come up with a design, the design's implemented, but there's going to be 25 years of freeze-thaw or sea level change. And we're saying that the engineering reports that we receive at staff level need to be cognizant of change conditions and to reflect any surveillance or maintenance that might need to be incorporated as part of the design. So that's a fairly new item for this set of guidelines. The guidelines are intended for private land development. They're intended to sort of assist in those legislated reports that are required in support of whatever permit is that's being applied for. They recognize this approval process that the city's bound by. And they recognize through a flowchart process that different documents may be needed. I think prior to these guidelines, there was often the thought that you need to have the geotechnical report. Really, that's not true. You need a series of documents that support the process. And it helps certainly with the engineers in discussions with developers to let them know that there will be a process to follow. It'll follow the actual development process, and there may be several reports that are leading to successful completion of an application. We've updated the design criteria to be very relevant to updated professional guidelines issued by the engineers and geoscientists. And with legislated reports, there's certain specific requirements for wording that are needed that you wouldn't necessarily put in a geotechnical report if it wasn't going to be submitted for a building or for some kind of permit. But there are specific legal wordings that need to be done that are brought out in these guidelines so that the engineer knows to include those. That's just the example of some of the different government acts that would follow through that process. And strangely, if you look at the details of those acts, they'll say define natural hazards, Some of them might include tsunami, some of them might include wildfire, some of them might include various things. They're not all the same. So we've sort of worked through a common set of natural hazards that need to be addressed when developing in the city. Areas of geotechnical design criteria, natural hazard is a large one, especially in Nanaimo with our rainfall, mountainous areas, climate change. Seismic design. Seismic design was an initiative we worked separately with the city on to develop criteria to have a more resilient, robust infrastructure. But there are areas where it comes to subdivisions, roads, utilities that aren't currently covered by the existing guidelines that are now covered in that broader envelope. And we've introduced a level of landslide safety that wasn't there before, very much sort of following the municipality of North Vancouver experience, being consistent with industry standard, but it's goalposts for engineers to work to as opposed to sort of having to come up with it themselves. It also makes it easier in the approval process to review. And as I say, this considerations of change conditions, I think that's a very important addition to the guidelines. These are report content requirements that may not be found in reports that aren't being submitted for legislative purposes, but the statement "safe for the use intended" is something that is mandated through various acts. It's not a phrase that the average geotechnical engineer likes to put in reports, but it's something that's required, so we've described how it can be incorporated. So I think that is sort of the update on the guidelines. Now moving to the new guidelines. As I say, the abandoned mine workings, it's not unique to Nanaimo. We've got Cumberland, Sable River, Canmore, there's a number of places, but it's fairly detailed. And I've reviewed a number of reports where engineers have given assessments and been completely silent because they weren't aware. I think the city's done a great job with the development permit area to give that awareness, and these guidelines are to supplement that and put some teeth to it. They fall underneath the umbrella of the overall guidelines, and we're trying to identify an expected process that follows industry standard, and a lot of the industry standard comes from Europe and Australia, not really from Canada. And even the Canadian Foundation Engineering Manual would say, look overseas for details. Within the guidelines, we've pulled together a lot of historical information to give a central starting point for practitioners to go to hopefully save some time and effort and focus, finances to the betterment of all. And as I say, this is in support of the newly created Development Permit Area number 4. Without going in detail to the table of contents, this is what it looks like in the general setting where we've got the historical information, we describe hazards, we look at potential risks, and then we set out a process for investigating and reporting. One of the things that isn't present at the moment in any form is when you do a civil engineering project, you often end up with as-built or as-constructed records that serve. In the geotechnical engineering field, we don't really have that. So what we've talked about here in these guidelines is the need for a validation or completion report that in the event you had to do some remedial work to make the hazard go away, it needs to be described, there needs to be a record so that it's on title, so that it can be utilized in the future. There can be an awareness of an improvement that was made to allow something to happen. That's currently missing, but hopefully it will be included. This is the Development Permit Area 4. The guideline comment there does reference the reports that are on the agenda today. And if you go, as you probably have, to the Nanaimo map, you'll see the outlines of mines. Those mine outlines include a fairly healthy buffer to allow for turn-of-the-century surveying, perhaps miners who may not have wanted to report coal because of royalty costs. There's a number of things that happen where they're not dead accurate, but this buffer sort of incorporates that. And we've identified the location of shafts and slopes, entrances into the mine that could be a higher hazard. Some examples, this is Protection Island, Newcastle Island, sorry. When you walk around Newcastle Island, the shaft is open to about 200 meters. That's looking down a hole in the cap where you can just look straight down. There's some shallow mine workings that you could crawl into if you so wished at the north end of the island. In the sort of Victoria Road down to Trans-Canada, a number of shallow workings that are in a state of partial collapse. You can see timber props that were holding the roof that have failed. They transfer load onto adjacent timber props. This is all, actively happening right now. The lower photograph, those workings are about 5 meters below ground. So there's a 2-meter void, in an area of development. These are sort of sinkholes that migrate upwards, and as you're probably aware, recently we had the one on Victoria Road. The left is just the encroachment into the paved area, which could be a hazard to drivers, motorcyclists, especially at night, if there's a sudden, drop in the road. And of course, investigating and remediating on the right-hand side is a fairly expensive proposition. Historical information in the guideline, it shows the entire city, and each mine has been given a unique number. You can go to a table, you can look at the name of the mine, the date of the mine, the depth, the coal seams that were worked. There's a lot of historical information that will save people a lot of time. There is a disclaimer that it can't be necessarily relied on to replace professional judgment, but it does serve as a starting spot to start the research. There's a lot of hazards. They may be related to the type of mining or the depth of mining. It's not just subsidence or collapse, but there can be noxious gases, there can be mine waste, there can be water issues. There's a number of things that need to be considered when you're looking at developing land. We've kind of tried to break those down so that they're not overseen and they can be assessed and if necessary, mitigated in the development process. A screening level risk assessment has been done with the work that we've been working with the city staff on. This isn't part of the development permit area details, but there's a sort of a traffic light ranking that would show areas that are particularly high risk of features that might include subsidence or surface features, so that they, if you're looking at development in those areas, you can be a little more forewarned. And of course, at the moment, we've screened all of the entrances and the slopes as high hazard, because just by the nature of them, you could lose a cap or protective cap, or maybe it's just backfill that just collapses. So they need to be identified. It'll give people orientation for doing their own studies. Just, for the room here, some of the higher risk areas, we're really, in that particular mapping, we're defining a sudden collapse or a breach of the surface. So we're including all of the shafts, and then areas of the New and Douglas mine, sort of south end in Victoria Road. It would have included the library and the adjacent building, but that's now been mitigated and made good. And then at the north end, the Wellington mine, Biggs Road area, there's a number of very shallow mines, and there are, fairly routinely collapse features that occur. Last slide, really. This is just within the guidelines. We have tried to describe the city's expectations for the process, a phased process that might be a fairly simple desktop study to eliminate or sort of to say there really isn't risk, right the way through to there is risk, we do need an investigation, we do need mitigation, we need a completion report to describe it. So that whole process is covered in these guidelines. And that is the guidelines, a quick introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. Much appreciated. And we'll open it up for questions from council. And first we got Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. One of the questions I have is, this is great for new developments, et cetera, but when we have people moving to the community, are they able to access this as well so that they know that the home they're buying may be on a fault or an old mine?
Yeah, and perhaps some of those questions might be sort of directed to staff, but from my perspective, just having the development permit area accessible online publicly, someone would be able to say, I'm within this area, and it would be a sort of disclosure, if you would, of that particular issue. They could then choose to get further details. Those further details would, to a limited extent, be available through the guidelines. There's a screening level assessment, but if they were concerned, then they would be forewarned to get something more detailed done for their own properties.
And as a follow-up to staff, would this information be put out to realtors so that they know it does exist?
Through the chair to Councillor Armstrong, I mean, part of the process that we're intending to do is to send these guidelines directly back to the geotechnical engineers. One thing that we didn't mention was that Carl actually did a presentation to geotechnical engineers who are working in Nanaimo, just to make them aware of the work that we're doing. We haven't sent it to realtors, but like Carl has mentioned, this information is going to be readily available on Nanaimo map. All of the links are going to the report, or the guidelines themselves are going to be made available on the website. So that would be part of the due diligence. It's readily available on our website for anybody who's interested, whether it's a property owner or a realtor.
Mr. Holm?
Thank you, Chair. Maybe I'll just add a little bit so we get the full table perspective. But anyway, just to extend on that too, and I think it was mentioned already, but the development permit area guidelines were part of the city plan review and adoption. So there was extensive public consultation and opportunity for people to become aware of the development permit area guideline requirements through city plan. This just really, and the information Mr. Miller's put together, the guidelines from, it's available publicly. It's more difficult to access now. This will kind of consolidate a lot of that information and sort of do, as you mentioned, a desktop sort of level risk assessment, sort of contextualize the information a little bit, and help people just with the awareness and where to access additional information if required. So I think the first step in really making the broader public, including the real estate community and anybody that's interested, aware and at the appropriate levels through the city plan process, and that was very heavily, there's heavy community consultation through that, a lot of awareness in the community around city plan and the initiatives there. One of those was the development permit area for abandoned mine workings.
The only reason I bring it up is there's a lot of new people here that weren't involved in city plan or don't, and there's a lot of people have no idea that Nanaimo is a mining community. So I did talk to somebody that had no idea that especially Divers Lake is full of old mines. So that's the only reason I brought it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. Mayor Krogh?
Thank you very much, Chair. Sharon and I live in a house that's in a subdivision that was new when we moved there 41 years ago, but has what I refer to as the coal covenant on it, which means we can't sue the city of Nanaimo should our house disappear into a deep hole one day. I'm just wondering, for practical purposes, is there much developable land? I mean, I see the amount under abandoned mine workings underlie approximately 13 of 93 square kilometers land within the city limits. A further 7 are abandoned workings located below adjacent coastal waters, which isn't going to impact us. Is there much developable land left, frankly, that is underlain?
Yeah, I mean, there's approximately 15% of the city is underlain by workings. Only a small portion is what I would consider to be a higher risk of some kind of surface breach. There's two. There's one is sort of virgin green space, and then there's redevelopment. And there's a lot of redevelopment in older areas that are specifically very much underlain by workings. So you're looking at, say, older areas in the neighborhood where, okay, well, that's coming down, here comes the new building. And I think that's particularly important because, people look to it and say, well, it's been developed, so what's the problem? And these things take a long time, hundreds of years and sometimes to propagate. So where people have said, well, there's a mine, but it's been there for 120 years, so what could go wrong?
Mr. Holm, and then follow up.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe I'll just add, and it actually touches, it's a good question from the mayor, and it touches on Councillor Armstrong's earlier question as well. I mean, this is from a development perspective, the awareness of the mining activity and the review of the potential hazard through the development approval process is nothing really new. So there are many properties in Nanaimo that would have covenants registered on title through development approvals or would have had investigation done in the past. This just really clarifies, so that kind of speaks a bit to the awareness. Obviously many properties were also developed historically before maybe the current legislative framework was in place requiring the type of investigative work that we do now to address hazards through development. Yeah, there's definitely, this isn't new, it's just this is really informing for clarity and consistency and alignment with professional practice guidelines and professional guidance more broadly, the investigation and mitigation of those hazards. Hopefully that helps. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Holm. Mayor Krogh?
Thank you very much, Chair. And for practical purposes, where we are, the risk is very low. If you look at the map, top end of Bay Street, little narrow sliver, number 1 mine shaft air vent, but flooded and used to be used to pump water onto the golf course to irrigate it. But as Miller mentioned, older parts of the city, so I've bought 3 or 4 lots and I'm knocking it down to put up a major apartment structure now. It is underlain with coal workings, mines. What are we going to do on a practical basis? Are we going to say, yeah, go ahead, but you're going to sign a covenant with the city so that anyone who rents, buys, whatever in that property is taking the risk? Or are we going to say, forget it, too bad, so sad, and you've bought 3 lots that are suitable for parkland? I mean, what do we do in a sort of practical way from a development perspective if I'm buying or building?
Through your chair, I think what's important to remember is that the reports are recommending remediation, right? So we're intending to make the land safe for the use intended, and making developers, landowners aware of the mine risk ahead of time prior to the assessments being done in the reports, and then the remediation, the completion reports that Mr. Miller mentioned. So when at the end of the process, construction has completed, the geotechnical remediation has occurred, and then we put a covenant on title, it's for awareness for future owners, but also future staff members or developers or anybody who just needs to understand what remediation occurred. And it's not saying that there's risk, the risk has been remediated, right? It's saying what the remediation was. I hope that helps.
Krogh?
Thank you. And I take it, in fairness, remediated to the engineering standards that have been recommended that will hopefully prevent, but there are no guarantees ultimately. Mm-hmm. Fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, it would be not uncommon at all to do a screening or to do a more detailed review and to say that there's no extraordinary risk introduced by these old deep workings to a conventional construction. So it's sort of a verification as opposed to there would necessarily need to be anything at all done.
And one more, if the chair will indulge me. What workings are the closest to the surface and in what parts of town? Can you give us any idea? I mean, I appreciate some of these are very, very deep and realistically.
Yeah, a lot are quite deep, and where they've been zoned green, it's really pretty much implying that there's a nominal, very low nominal risk, and you tend to be more concerned about poor fill materials or superficial soils than you would do some kind of mining impact. In town, where there are elevated concerns, would be the sort of Victoria Road, Old Victoria Road. That mine, there's 2 mines, the Old Douglas, the New Douglas, that dips and gets deeper as you go towards the ocean, but it daylights and becomes very shallow just to the west of Victoria Road. So Victoria Road itself and the area just west of Victoria Road is an area where the workings may be less than 10 meters deep, they could be as much as 2 meters high, and there really isn't sufficient cover to protect sort of the falling process from migrating to the surface. Got the same thing in East Wellington. When you go up towards Biggs Road and some of the newer subdivisions around there, there are some areas again where those mines are very shallow. We've seen surface expression. Water mains have punched through mines. There's been a various number of things that have happened around there. That Divers Lake, Sloane Road, Horth Road is a slightly different animal in that there were a bunch of crazy Scottish miners that tried to advance a shaft. They ran into running sand and they kept pumping and pumping and pumping. They drew a lot of the sand and they caused cavities in the ground that have subsequently caused some collapse. So it's mining related, but it's not really coal seam related. It's something else. And that's an awkward one because it's somewhat random. It's not so predictable as coal and dips and strikes, and you can predict where these things are going to happen. And then I think with the mine shafts, there's, we've got something like 90 openings that really not that many are specifically known, and the condition is not known on a number of them. And they represent a very localized, but potentially quite a serious hazard.
Thank you very much for this, and thank you, Chair, for indulging me in fascinating stuff.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Chair. It is fascinating stuff, and thank you for the presentation. I was struck by your comment about not knowing where some of the mines' workings are based on people trying to avoid royalties or paying taxes. And so I'm curious about how much we actually know about a lot of these workings, and are there surprises out there?
Yeah, it's a great question. We were quite pleased with the drilling recently on Victoria Road, where surveyed pillars of coal were mapped on the old plans. We drilled and we found those. Where there were open rooms, we drilled and we found open rooms. So it was like, wow, that was 140 years ago surveying, and it was, our drilling confirmed what the maps showed. Back in the day when we did the Nanaimo Parkway, just going past Mostar, those workings were in the order of 30% larger than they were shown on the plan, and there was a whole area that the Ministry of Transportation paid for that was not expected, but that got proved out as the drilling stepped out. So it depends on the mining company, the mining inspector at the time. There were a number of variables, and there's also sort of second phase mining where during hardships, First World War, Second World War, people went back in and they changed, they robbed pillars of coal, they did whatever they needed to do, and that isn't really very well documented. So you may think you've got an abandonment plan, but it really isn't the last thing that happened.
So we have some unknowns underneath Nanaimo.
Yeah.
I'm curious about, we have this location on Front Street where they were looking at putting up a building, and there's a mine working almost directly below that, right?
Yeah, some of the oldest workings, the Hudson Bay Corporation had mine 1, 2, and 3. Number 1 is the one that's just next to us with the library. And then on Front Street, we've got the Hudson Bay 2 and 3, fairly small mines.
And is that what's stalling construction in that area? Is that what stalled that? Because they dug that all out, it looked like they were ready to put up a building. Was that implicated in that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that was a determining factor. No, I have to speak with the owner directly, but I understand they've had some changes in their plans for the property.
Okay.
And are looking at other options.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Eastmere.
Thank you. Through you, in attachment B, the guidelines for geotechnical assessments above abandoned mine workings, I noted on page 8, there's a reference to Newcastle Island. As this is a draft, I would like to see that amended to use the proper name, Say-Suchin. And
Sure.
That's my only note on that, and if that appears anywhere else, to update our language. Thank you.
Yeah. I think the guidelines started in 2019, so it probably is time for an update.
Thank you. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. I'm tempted to comment on bringing coals to Newcastle, but that illusion might be lost. Thank you very much, Mr. Miller and staff, for this information. I find it really quite interesting. And again, just out of my curiosity, I note in the report, Mr. Miller, you did a webinar to other regional engineers and shared the guidelines with them. Mm-hmm. Would that, I hope, include the Regional District of Nanaimo staff? Because I'm thinking of all of the mines in the area south of town, Minetown Road, of course.
Yeah. I don't know that they were specifically invited. There was something like 60 attendees, staff and various engineering groups. We're at the moment, WSP is at the moment doing a hazard review for the Regional District of Nanaimo. It's mainly on slopes, but we're encouraging them to incorporate the mining aspect. So they're very aware of it. They're just looking for some additional funding.
Excellent. Thanks very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. I do have one question, might be straying a little bit, but you know, it's great these guidelines being set up, and I'm just curious, say for some of the higher hazard areas, I know the regional district, we plan for earthquakes, you know, where to put the material, and is there space in our landfill, you know, post earthquake. Do we do hazard assessment on, like, if there was an earthquake in these high risk areas, is there a chance that houses might sink into the ground?
I think the question is, could there be a seismically induced event that would cause some larger collapse?
Yeah, I think, sorry, through to you, Chair. I can't speak extensively to that, but I know that's something that's on our radar as far as the sort of our hazard risk vulnerability assessment through our emergency management program, just in general related to hazards and what the potential outcomes might be. I know Mr. Sims and his staff obviously are very well aware of the potential hazards related to infrastructure as well. And there was an update in 2022 to the Manual of Engineering Standards and Specifications that Council will probably recall that did upgrade the did address the geotechnical guidelines, design standards, criteria, I guess, related to infrastructure to help address some of that concern going forward. But as you said, there is there's a potential with a significant event to have for a variety of reasons, but a significant seismic event could create substantial construction waste, demolition waste, I guess, that would have an impact on a landfill and our ability to manage that waste stream is something that is on our radar from an emergency management perspective, but not directly related to these guidelines. This is more for guiding development as we go forward, so it'll be more resilient to the impacts of those types of events.
Thank you. I would imagine there are certain areas in town that would be quite interested in that. I mean, you know that houses and things were built before there was an in-depth risk assessment as outlined now, and given that interesting here, you know, during tougher times, maybe some mines were opened up a little bit more and columns taken out. I imagine when I think of the risks from an earthquake, probably the higher order end of folks potentially in those areas. So that's something that I'm glad that's on the radar, and maybe something to pursue a little bit more focused going forward. Thank you.
I'll move the recommended motion.
We have Councillor Hemmons moving the recommended motion, seconded by Mayor Krogh. Any discussion? Yep.
Do you mind if I have a quick question? I'm already on.
Oh, I just messed that up. Hold on. Councillor Evans.
Thank you. This is through to staff, and forgive my ignorance, I really should know this, but the settling on Old Victoria Road, had that been 25 feet
to the west, that would have been under a house. Would the homeowner be responsible then for the remediation?
Yes, through the chair to Councillor Hemmons, yes, that would be an impact on private property. The homeowner would be responsible.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Mayor Krog? No?
Bill?
Mr. Sims?
Thanks, Chair. Just to maybe follow the unanswered question in Councillor Hemmons' point there was, we've been speaking with the province, and the province has informed us that those older mines are a pre-existing hazard. They're no longer considered an abandoned mine, even though they're quite clearly an abandoned mine. They do have a Department of Abandoned Mines, which looks up to, I believe it's up to about 60 years ago, but anything beyond that is considered an existing hazard. As Mr. Holm referenced, we're looking at our hazard risk vulnerability assessment and needing to consider that. We're also sort of inquiring what remedies we may have with the province, who took the royalties, managed the mining from the 1800s onwards, packed up their office, took all their plans and went back to Victoria and left us sort of holding the bag. So we're having those discussions. But as Mr. Holm referenced, we're very concerned about what may happen with our infrastructure, with our road network, of course. And typically what we saw on Victoria Road is the typical mode of failure that we've observed, which is this sort of slow thump, very localized area. But as the chair referenced, a larger seismic event is certainly a concern and would be quite an impact, potentially to a block or two of houses. So that is an active discussion that we're having with Mr. Miller and other experts as well.
Absolutely, thank you. So we have the motion on the floor. Not seeing any more discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. And that brings us, thank you, Mr. Miller and staff for all that. Thanks. This brings us to the next item on the agenda, Healthy Nanaimo, allocation of unallocated pedestrian funds. Mr. Sims.
Thanks, Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Good afternoon, Council. So this is our annual sort of ritual of appearing in front of you and saying, well, we have some, Council has a line item of funding available for that is termed pedestrian unallocated. Here's an opportunity to allocate it. At the same time, we had, this a good opportunity for a larger discussion around pedestrian safety, and with the recent delegation from Bayview School, this is an opportunity to sort of refresh council and have that broader discussion on the active school travel program. So just, you'll hear from Mr. Rose. He's got a bit of a presentation and the rationale behind the recommended project for this year's funding, which is to update the crosswalks, or to make safer the crosswalks along Albert Street. And this really grew out of last year's discussion around pedestrian unallocated. Those were fairly high priority projects, but we diverted to other projects. One of the reasons that we brought that one back is we were successful in one of the funded projects receiving an active transportation grant, and that's the departure-based sidewalk. So that actually frees up some additional funding for this year. Mr. Rose has structured the report such that we've also talked about some other potential projects down the road. There's, as you've seen in the report, there's a fairly good emphasis on crossings, because that's the highest bang for buck, if you will, for improving pedestrian safety. But it's not doing a lot for pedestrian comfort, along the road. So that's sort of referenced in the report, and we're welcome to have that discussion as well. But one of the other pieces that we've been focusing on and getting very positive feedback from the Advisory Committee on Accessibility and Inclusion is improving accessibility at particularly crosswalks, but also transit stops and so on. And that's Council's put $1 million a year aside for the last 4 years, which has really accelerated a lot of those types of projects. So the pedestrian unallocated program was really there to help accelerate some of the projects that we have great difficulty getting to in our capital plan. We don't have to restate it, but maybe it's always helpful to restate. Nanaimo was a series of small town centers that have sort of strung together with roads that we've been spending the last almost 50 years now trying to fill in the sort of pedestrian and active transportation means between. So we're never seeming to catch up as well. Maybe I'll leave it there, and this is a great opportunity for open discussion around active school travel and all things pedestrian. I'll pass it over to Mr. Rose.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sims. Touched on a lot of points there. I do have a slide deck here to go through to discuss the allocation of unallocated funds. I think we need to work on our titling, but before we get too deep into it, I just want to do a quick recap of the last 2 years worth of projects. They've been fairly extensive. Note in the report that both of these years were $1 million investments. The work to date for the 22 projects is complete, but for town site at Holly. We're just finalizing the detailed designs for that right now and expect to be into construction this summer. Flipping that to all of the 2023 projects are in design, but not completed as of yet. Though we do expect to see a number of these going into construction this summer in anticipation of school start in September. And so looking forward to seeing a lot of these move forward. Before I get into the sort of suggested option to move forward, I just want to quickly kind of recap the discussion around how we approach this funding source. And as Mr. Sims says, there's a number of capital projects we undertake annually, and quite often we're able to incorporate a number of improvements for pedestrians and cyclists and transit users through those projects. Typically, of late, those projects have been driven by asset renewal. Utilities need to be upgraded, pavement needs to be resurfaced, and so it gives us a really good opportunity to couple enhancements. There've been quite a few conferences and presentations we've done recently where we're continually talking about building back better. And so, many things have been built over the years, and they worked for a period of time, but when we have an opportunity to step it up, we like to seize that. And so one of the things that we've done over the past few years to help us with that is really to solidify some of our programs. And I think a number of them have come to this table for discussion, the pedestrian prioritization being the most directly related to this topic. And we've had, I believe we had 3 or 4 presentations to talk about how and why we add the values to different locations and how we assess them. And then fold that into our process and model to understand where we are going to get the best bang for our buck. And so that correlates to these point scores that you see relating to each location. I do think we've touched on this as well, but these point scores they appear very precise, but they are attention directing. And so, 53 versus 49 is not an absolute thou shalt. It is, these are both fairly high priorities, and we really should look at finding something to do to improve them. And that doesn't mean that we can't deviate from that, but it really does encourage us to stay on that program so that when we go through and if for some reason ever had to go back and understand an audit of why a decision was made, we could explain that and share that either with the community or with whomever. And so, as Mr. Sims noted, last year we brought forward a number of locations that typically focused on crossings, and through a variety of further discussions, to identify a Departure Bay sidewalk in front of Departure Bay Eco School as an opportunity to take at that time by way of deferring improvements along Alberta Street. We were successful in a grant application for that, which freed up some funds. And based on the conversations we heard around this table, understood that we should probably bring this location back for further discussion. And so we do have an opportunity to revisit this and look at finding ways to improve pedestrian connectivity along one of our primary active transportation routes. Ideally, bridging that final link from VIU to downtown, as well as supporting the integration of the new transit exchange and further development of Commercial Street. We've outlined a couple of opportunities here. There's 2 existing crosswalks with one other one that we believe also provides strong connectivity across the downtown, our primary urban center. We are definitely exploring different ways to improve these crossings. We've tabled the idea of raised crosswalks, the rectangular rapid flash beacons, curb extensions where there aren't any that already exist. All of those are strong elements that support a more walkable community and increase pedestrian comfort and safety at intersections. As Mr. Sims noted, there are a number of items that are on our radar, and we're trying to find ways to incorporate them into either individual projects or larger scale projects. And one of the ones that's been very prominent in conversations I've been part of is accessibility. The leaps and bounds we've made over the last 5 to 10 years are quite remarkable, but we still have a long way to go. And that's not only implementing things, but also reviewing and enhancing our standards. It wasn't that long ago that our standards were quite minimalist. Curb ramps were a requirement, but the feedback for people with limited visibility was a single line in the gutter pan. We elevated that to trowel lines in curb ramps, which was sort of the standard of the 2000s. We've now added the TWSIs, or tactile warning surface indicators, I believe. And now what we're actually looking into is wayfinding, tactile wayfinding. So not only providing information for folks where the conflict points are, but also providing guidance on linear features. So for example, with Commercial Street, we're looking at incorporating these lineal feedback elements along the building frontage so that there's guidance along that corridor. Further to that, we've also, I believe it was 2 years ago, maybe 3, we talked about doing some accessibility improvements at our transit stops. And so we have been working through that list. Some of them are proving to be a little more challenging than we'd expected, but this is something that we need to turn our attention to and really start focusing on expanding that, because when as transit continues to build and improve, we need to make sure it's fully accessible for all users. Another location that we've had on our radar but have struggled to find a way to incorporate is a raised sidewalk along 3rd Street, just south of, or southeast of Jinglepot.
Thanks, Mr. Rhodes. We'll go to Councillor Armstrong. Question.
Do you have the point score for the
through the chair, I believe that those have been added to the end, and I can touch on those if there. I do have them on hand. If there's one in particular you're looking for.
That one.
Sorry.
Yeah, I don't have any scores added to mine.
Sorry?
I have no other scores added to mine, so I was wondering what the score was for the 3rd Street sidewalk expansion.
So one of the things that we did, or acknowledged, I think, when we did our pedestrian prioritization was to use the crossings as a proxy to inform sidewalk prioritization. And so the crossing scores on 3rd Street, there's, oh, no, that's Howard Avenue. It was a 41.
Thank you.
And so that is in sort of in the spectrum, that's sort of what we would regard as a medium lowish. The majority of projects we've been working on of late are in the high 40s, low 50s. But so this particular sidewalk is a missing link from the field house up to Jingle Pot. And ideally, we would couple this with some sort of surface restoration or utility renewal, but they haven't come around, and so it's something that we are looking at a way to include, but also trying to find a way to do it in an economically efficient way.
Chair, just to let you all know, there is a handout with those scores that will be shown at the end of the presentation, as well as added to our supplemental items on the website.
Thank you.
Within the report, we have talked about a number of locations or areas that we are also are including some pedestrian improvements. Some of them are already in the approved capital plan, some of them are in a future capital plan, and some of them are somewhat stuck because of future conversations with other agencies that we have to go through. And so, as an example, Norwell Drive, so that is a corridor that is in need of both utility and surface renewal. It's a primary, it's going to be one of the busiest transit exchanges in the city once the TRS continues to roll out. And as example, the crossing on Norwell at Barron's currently ranks as a 61. So that's a fairly critical area. 3rd Street at Howard is also 57. That's included in the current plan for the 3rd Street corridor upgrades. I'm happy to go through the list right now, or we can wait till the end if there's any questions.
I've got a question from Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Chair. So a couple things. One is, could we have the handout now?
Yes, please.
Could we have the handout now so we can see the rankings as we're discussing them?
Thank you. Through the chair, I don't believe, is there copies for everyone though? So yeah, they just brought it to the meeting, so we can put it on the screen though.
Okay, thank you.
It's up on the screen now for you.
Okay, now my real question is, there's a number on this list, and of course, because the highway goes right through the city, but they require consultation with MODI. And I just want to get a sense from staff on the appetite for that consultation with MODI. Or are these just, when we say that they require consultation, they're just kind of bottom of the list, it's not our decision? Or is there an appetite to get some of these done? Because they're long-standing.
I think that there's a bit of a variety there. So Stewart Ave.
Go back down.
Stewart Ave, for example, we've actually had some really constructive conversations with MODI. And so that is currently in our plan, though we do have to finalize some details with them. And so that's something we actually plan to take to the public later this year to kind of choose option A or option B. We've had some details on the website for a while. So that's one that is moving forward with the usual governmental speed. The conversations around the TCH nickel further to the south are not moving quite as quickly. I think we all do understand that there's some challenges, but we are still also trying to both understand our roles in the equation. And so I know the intersection of Nickel and Needham has been a topic of conversation for quite a while, and Ministry has sort of gone through their toolkit to see what options can be done to make it a more pedestrian-friendly crossing. The Ministry does have some very explicit guidelines and parameters that they need to work within. And so we are trying to get as creative as we can, but it does sometimes take some longer conversations. So.
Thank you. And a follow-up, if I may, and you might not be able to answer this, or it might be an unfair question, but is it reasonable to think that the provincial government would be looking at tying these into provincial government initiatives? So if there's housing going in around Mackay, that might bump that up a bit. Or if there's improvements being made to Departure Bay Ferry Terminal, that might accelerate the Stewart Avenue conversation. Is that accurate? Is that how it works?
I couldn't say, to be perfectly honest.
That's fair.
I will say that without kind of beating a dead horse, the conversations with Stewart Ave have been very constructive and very positive. So I think that that's really a positive indicator. The TCH is a much higher demand corridor and does have a bit more of a highway flavor to it. So I'm not sure how they would communicate within their different jurisdictions.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Chair, if I may just interrupt while we're switching back to the presentation, that, you know, as Mr. Rose mentioned, the TCH is a little more challenging, but I think Mr. Lindsay heard last week some surprise at the work that we're doing here on Terminal Avenue, and able to sort of elevate that to quite a much more of a pedestrian than a highway commercial feel. So that's at least a positive. And back to your first question, Councillor Hemmons, we're definitely willing on our side to have the conversation, and Mr. Rose is frequently in conversation with the ministry. It's just that their timelines are different and their priorities are, you know, elsewhere on the island as well.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, identify one thing sort of in this conversation that Mr. Sims reminded me of when we were talking last week at the Land Summit. We were able to highlight that Modi's openness to include our raised local intersection standard on commercial. And although it took some effort, I think that's a really strong indicator of how they do understand our priorities and our values and are definitely willing to come to the table. So there's a couple of other areas that we've included in the report to completely acknowledge that we have heard these concerns and understand that there are members of the community that would like to see more, and we would love to do more, but for a variety of reasons, you know, resources across the board, it's quite challenging to move everything forward all at once. And so this, you know, going back, this was a primary driver for us to develop our prioritization process. And so we've looked at Hammond Bay Road and the areas around the Cole Quarterway, Bayview School and Park Ave School, and to determine if there is an opportunity to incorporate anything. At this time, it's a little bit challenging for us to do anything in these areas, but they are definitely on our radar. Hammond Bay in particular was a conversation last year at the Neighborhood Association meeting, and there was definitely some aspiration on our part to be able to meet the hopes and needs of the community. The image on the lower left there is essentially Hammond Bay Road with a marked shoulder, and our goal was to try and find a way to provide a connection along Hammond Bay. We interpret it from the biological station to Lagoon Drive. I think we maybe skewed that or misinterpreted it. I understand it was from Prince John to Chinook, so there's about a 200-meter difference between those two, but we kind of moved it around the corner a little much. There is, to some degree, a marked shoulder on the northwest side from Prince John to the biological station, but it does sort of taper out, and there's no really improved crossing there. And so the discussion last year really was around trying to find a way to use operational situations to try and create this corridor. And so ideally just adding a secondary line, a fog line or a shoulder line to provide that connection. But when we went through it with our designers, we found that unfortunately the way the existing road markings are, it's not actually possible to do that. And fundamentally everything has to be removed and then put back. And even then we don't end up with a completely consistent shoulder on one side or the other. We do shrink it down, and it has to squeeze it down, I think, to about 1.2 meters for short sections. And so in having to completely remove and then replace all of the road markings over that stretch, it is upwards of $100,000. And so with the upcoming regional district sewer main replacement coming, it really sort of challenges the question as to whether this is the time to do this or whether there's a better opportunity in the future. And so at this point in time, we're not recommending advancing any work, but continuing to pursue discussions with the RDN.
Great, thank you. I've got a question from Councillor Eastmere and then Mayor Crowe. Okay, Mayor Crowe.
Thank you very much, Chair. So just to be very clear for everyone who's listening, we can spend $100,000 now and provide a temporary solution, and then see it all ripped up in a few years when we put this, when the RDN, as it inevitably will and has to, put the sewer line down the road.
Unfortunately, that is the case. Yeah, I mean, I think if the RDN was not coming forward, we'd be having a completely different conversation. Probably looking for other ways to create a more enhanced facility, but whatever goes down is likely going to be in whole or in part destroyed.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Eastmere.
So
I know, I'm fighting with. Councillor Eastmere, go ahead.
thank you. So it says that it's not recommended, but improvements could be considered when restoring roads from the RDN Hammond Bay Road Sewer Project. So how do we communicate that that's a thing that we want, and to make sure that it is considered in a real way, because there's political will behind a fix for this area?
Yeah, Chair, thanks. That's an excellent question, and we're part of the project team with the regional district. They're running the project for the sewer. It's a very high priority for them to deal with, but it does impact a number of city utilities, water main, sewers along Hammond Bay Road, as well as, of course, the surface. It'll be a very disruptive project, but we're at the table, and we recognize very clearly that we can't put the road back and paint the lines the same way it is today. It does need an improvement. So that is all part and parcel of the project.
Okay, yeah, we'll make sure that the disruptions are worth it in the end, and we get a nicer, more pedestrian-friendly project out of it. So maybe it isn't actually an opportunity. It will be. We can make it one.
Thank you. Just to follow up there, the $100,000 to restripe, that's about a 200-meter stretch of road, or how long?
Through the chair, no, that's closer to 2,000 meters.
Okay.
So at a unit rate price, that's actually quite economical, but it is a big lump sum to be temporary.
Okay, so per kilometer, if we want to erase the road lines and put new road lines down, it's about $50,000 per kilometer.
Yeah, I think that's a
okay.
Reasonable
Great. That's good to know. Thank you.
I should highlight though that that's just road markings. That's not bollards like we had on Departure Bay or on 7th. That's just putting back a shoulder.
Correct. Thank you.
Another area, as Mr. Sims mentioned, we've had a delegation of the Public Safety Committee to talk about walking around or pedestrian mobility around Bayview Elementary. So we do have an underground utility project underway right now, or breaking ground any day, I guess. And so we did look at incorporating a sidewalk into this project because we did know that it was something that we value, mobility around a school. And as I mentioned at the Public Safety Committee, that's still close to $200,000 a lineal meter for upwards of $600,000. So what we have been looking at since that discussion is an opportunity to include a marked shoulder when we restore the road, not unlike what we're talking about on Hammond Bay, and finding a way to define a bit more of a pedestrian space. The way the road is structured right now, it would likely mean removing parking around the perimeter of the school, reduces conflict, creates conflict in other areas. But We've got our designers working on sort of sketching that into the restoration plans for the area. So we would end up with a shoulder around the school, and then also out the west side of Princess Ave out to 5th Street. So any connections to the Boys and Girls Club, things of that nature. And so it's not a sidewalk, but it is an improved and defined area.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. Can you just remind me what the score was for Bayview again, please?
Sorry, through the chair, that's the crosswalks around Bayview?
Yeah.
Okay. Needham at View was 30, Victoria Road at Rayner was 35, Victoria Road at 7th was 28, 5th between Railway and Princess was 37.
Thank you. So they'd all be considered low to medium, correct?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we also recently received some inquiries from the Park Avenue School for sidewalk infill. And this is an area that is, I would say, in a state of transition. There's a lot of development going on in that neighborhood. When the developments do come in, they do bring sidewalk with them. Park Ave and some of the other older roads do not have sidewalk. Some have shoulders, some do not. But it is also a very low density area, and there's little or no transit in the area, so there's a number of things that don't generate points through our system to identify this as a priority area to invest in. It's not to say that we wouldn't love to put sidewalk in here. It's just when we have to balance our priorities, it doesn't quite fit there. The crosswalk scores that we do have in that area are quite sparse. Yeah, 7th at Railway is a 25. Victoria Road at 7th is a 28. Now that does, unfortunately, so those are fairly low scoring neighborhoods. So, and that's why we haven't identified it as a recommended area for work. Can I bump back a slide?
Sorry, Mr. Rose, we were putting the other chart back up, but that's okay. You can go ahead now.
Councillor Easterwood, did you have a question that you wanted to get out right now?
I'm actually having a bit of difficulty hearing you when you're sharing the numbers from the scores.
Oh, apologies. I can repeat those. So 7th at Railway was 28. 25. Victoria Road at 7th was 28. And those were the only ones that we have scored near Park Ave School. We do have other crosswalks in the area, but they may be controlled, so they'd be a stop control, and it's sort of outside of our scope for this type of task. Cole Quarterway is another one that we've had some ongoing conversations with. And so this is an area where we're looking at and hearing some concerns. It doesn't currently score that high. It's a 41, I believe, which is sort of at the medium low end of the spectrum. And 41. And so one of the challenges that we're sort of struggling with here is that it's not a neighborhood school. It's actually it's a French immersion school, so the catchment is almost infinite. And so in order to understand where best to make investments to improve pedestrian connectivity, we really need to have a strong understanding of where parents or families live and where students are commuting from. And so how we've approached that in the past is through our active school travel program. And so we've done this with almost all of the schools in the north end. So McGirr, Randerson, Franknay, Departure Bay, Uplands. We're currently working with Chase River and Cinnabar. And then the next one we will be participating in is actually going to be led by the school district through the reopening of Rutherford. And so that, to be honest, kind of captures our next 3 years worth of work for active school travel. So there's an unfortunate challenge where we can't get the information to answer the question we need. We've had the conversation about, well, what if we just put a crosswalk on town site and generally in this location here? Unfortunately, we'd just be putting people back into an island. There's no improved walking facilities around or through that sort of triangular parcel of land where the Legion is. And so, again, it's the intersection on East Wellington. We've actually since added a centerline crosswalk sign since that picture was taken. But again, it's not in our top scoring locations. And as for other improvements, we're not sure that we want to make sure that we put them in the right place. So, and I do have a map of Cole Quarterway and the others if there's any questions or discussions around that. And I also have the list of locations with scores afterward.
Got another school-related question here, Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Rose, would it be accurate to say that the school district works with the city to identify the school areas with the highest impact for investment?
I would say so. In fact, I think when we go back to the discussions that we have had with them over the past 3 to 4 years, maybe even 5 now that I think about it, the development of the pedestrian prioritization process, they were at the table. The development of our active school travel toolkit, they were right there with us. So we are, and I think I've said we're in lockstep with them on just about everything. And so we're constantly working and hearing from them how to optimize our mutual investments to benefit the community.
So then, if I may, in relation to the 3 years coming up where we have our identified schools, the school district had a hand in choosing those schools and is on board with those?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Sims.
Thanks, Chair. Just if I can sort of round that discussion out a little bit, I think you've seen a fair bit. We've Mr. Rose's staff, and we've seen a lot of interest from a lot of schools about, making improvements around their particular school. And part of what we've done with the active school program is systematize this. We wish we could do everything all at once. This is a hard thing for staff as well. But systematizing and creating a process around prioritizing not only the school areas, but also the active or the pedestrian projects, any active transportation, creating that system is actually probably having the greatest effect and the greatest impact across the entirety of the city. That's the challenge that we're trying to do this stuff in priority order, and working with the school district to create these systems provides a defendable way of developing the projects and putting them out there. And of course, that's not going to meet everyone's hopes or dreams or expectations, but at least if we can start with the generally the highest priority ones first, then we can sort of continue to work through the list.
Councillor Eastmere.
Going back to the rankings and the scores, can you just highlight again where those scores actually come from? Like how do those numbers get calculated?
That might be a meeting unto itself, but there's a number of factors that go into it. So we engaged a consultant a few years ago to come in and help us audit our pre-existing system.
Sorry, you had someone come in a couple of years ago, and there was a GPC on this with the previous council?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
It was about 3 hours.
Yeah, sorry, missed what you said there. Continue, yeah.
Nope. And so we went through that process with a consultant and all of the stakeholders that we've discussed, the school district, the RDN, the RCMP. I'm trying to think if who else was at the table, but it was a very inclusive process. And so what we've done, it also included looking at a lot of the information that we was generated through the preliminary stages of city plan. And so we also did a lot of peer reviews. I think we did a comparison to Kelowna, Kamloops, Bellingham, and Boulder, Colorado, I think was the other town that we looked at for other agencies using prioritization processes. And so to get to your question, we use the very traditional speed, volume, collision history, things of that nature. We also look at pedestrian generators, either through land use, transit, schools, things of that nature. We use walk score as well. One of the new ones that we included was socioeconomic factors. And so we looked at it through the lens of, do people have a choice to walk, or is that the only mode that they have access to? And so if we look at areas that are slightly more affluent and likely have multiple cars per household versus houses or residences that where we have low car ownership and people are relying on being able to walk to and from their daily needs, those areas got higher scores than the other. After that, I'd have to go through and go back and look at the presentations from before, but it was a fairly inclusive list.
Were neighborhood associations part of that inclusive process?
I don't believe we reached out explicitly to neighborhood associations, but we did come to multiple GPCs to discuss it.
Okay, thank you.
Good, thank you. Is that the end of the presentation? No.
Nope.
Oh, done, okay.
No, I'm good.
Let's open it up here for council discussion. Councillor Eastmere.
I just have a question going back to the list of prioritized projects from 2022 and 2023. I found it hard to understand what was being communicated to us as far as what's in process and what's been completed and not completed, because everything was either in green or purple, and I feel like there's a bunch of those that haven't been completed, especially from 2023. Can we just go over those again and get us a better sense of what's been done and what hasn't?
Certainly. So from the 20, and by the way, the green versus purple was actually correlating to crossing versus sidewalk.
Oh, it's crossing versus sidewalk.
Correct.
Okay, I thought it was cycling versus personal vehicles from the thing on the side there.
Oh, no.
Okay.
I'll have to double check
Very
our slide decks.
confused about all the things, sorry.
So the green are crossings, so Departure Bay at Barons, so that's, we reconstructed the center island and put flashers on that, or put the, we had this conversation previously, I apologize, but so historically we've used the round yellow beacons, and it's sort of almost like a train wigwag. Mm-hmm. The new standard is the rectangular rapid flash beacons, so those are the very high intensity rectangular ones that you can see from about 3 blocks away. So we reconstructed the island with accessibility features and added and upgraded to the rectangular rapid flash beacons. That's the same for Applecross at Kalinda as well. Fitzwilliam at Selby Street, we added the beacons. Third of the trail was also beacons. Franklin at Selby, we constructed curb extensions, so that shortens the crossing distance, improves visibility between pedestrians and drivers. And then Townside Holly is yet to be constructed, but that is going to be a raised crosswalk to provide a continuity of the ENN trail. Departure Bay Road, Highland Boulevard to 19A sidewalk that was completing the link from the intersection down to the existing sidewalk. So the neighborhood's now connected to Solaire and there.
Were we using scores when the Franklin Street at Selby Street project was selected?
The crosswalk there has the tactile warning, so the yellow panels with the truncated domes, and it has the score lines.
No, she means the schools.
Oh, scores. Sorry. Yes, we were.
We were, okay.
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah, I find that one particularly fascinating because it doesn't seem like a really high traffic area at all. It's crossing from like towards an empty lot, and like for me, it's just one of those examples of like the data might have said something, but when you're walking in that area, I'm like, I guess we're building for the city we want to see in the future.
Yeah. So the scoring metrics that we've used are both reactive and proactive. So we are trying to, we had a similar conversation with the crossing up on Applecross at Kalinda. And we heard from some people that it was not deemed to be or not felt that it was an uncomfortable crossing. But when we're looking at things through the sort of 8 to 80 or AAA facility lens, we want to make sure that nobody feels that it's uncomfortable so that everybody can use it. So there are some instances where it may feel like we've elevated it unnecessarily, but.
Okay, so that's a rundown for 2022. Thank you so much.
Did you have anything more?
So for 2023, like again, it was really unclear to me when you said some of these have been started, some haven't. If I can just get a better sense, is there anything on here that hasn't been acted on?
So all of these have the designs in progress right now, and
sorry, what was that word? They all
designs
in progress.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Howard Ave. None of these are in construction right now, but the Departure Bay, the two on Departure Bay, the sidewalk and the 3700, which is the crossing at Rock City School, as well as Howard Ave and the 400 block of Campbell are all envisioned to be in construction this summer. And the others will follow suit, but it'll be a sort of a capacity-based delivery.
And if I can just ask about the Campbell Street one in the 400 block, there's a crosswalk over to Pauline Harrer that's like right at the top of that hill, right? And
that's the one.
Is that where we're envisioning to rebuild the crosswalk? Because it's just, you're kind of coming up a blind hill there, and so I can see why a raised crosswalk might be good if it's right at the like tippy top of that hill, because otherwise I feel like it's going to continue to be a pretty dangerous crossing.
Interestingly enough, I was at a design review last week and we had that exact conversation. Is this the place to put it, or should we actually just fully lock, stock and barrel move it
it should be moved
to align with Selby? And so we're actually now looking at aligning it with Selby, which actually comes back around to the question about Selby Street, because now Selby Street would have a continuous corridor of improved crosswalks all the way from Albert Street to the school. So helps to provide a walking route for students coming from the neighborhood.
Okay, and I do note a lot of people do commute to that school either by bike or by walking, but it is not a catchment area school.
True. Yeah.
Councillor Armstrong. Oh, did you have any more follow-up? Okay, Councillor Armstrong.
Just to follow up on that, as we've seen recently, we're seeing a lot of our projects going over budget. Do you think these ones might, based on your preliminary, which probably were last year's, right, figures coming in last year, has there been a significant increase in cost this year that these projects could go up? And if so, do we know how much, and should we maybe be just using our dollars this year to finish off those ones?
I think there's always a risk, but I think that from what we've seen in pricing from this year to date, we seem to have actually caught up with the curve, and so our projections for budgeting is starting to get back in line with where our costs are actually coming in. So it is a risk, but I think it's a much, much lower risk than we've seen in previous years.
Great, thank you.
Woo. That's good news. Councillor Eastmere.
Going back to the Bayview area, are we looking at anything to address that five-way intersection at like View and Victoria and?
We're not currently looking at anything there. We've had, we're aware that there's some concerns from the community. It is awkward. I'm not gonna sugarcoat that. There aren't too many places that have 5-legged intersections and fewer that have multiple ones, but Nanaimo has 3. And so it is, the interesting thing is that typically things like that, especially when you've got an all-way stop, don't tend to actually generate an actual safety issue. It's uncomfortable, so people slow down, they stop, they become heightened to what's going on around them. And so at this point, we don't see any information that suggests that we do need to address anything. The other factor is that closing the skewed leg, which would be the most obvious one, although what it was identified in the neighborhood plan, has some significant impacts to businesses and residents in the area. That gas station has the access off of it. And so it's not a trivial change. So, with things like that, which are very much in line with our traffic calming conversations, a significant amount of public consultation would need to be undertaken to ensure that it's not a small number of people who have a desire to see a change. It's broader than that, and that the full implications are understood.
I guess I find it interesting that that was identified as an area that needed attention, and there was the whole conversation around View Street from that neighborhood plan from 2010, and I feel like a lot of those actions on the implementation list just didn't get done, and I find it frustrating that we would say, oh, we have to go back and do the consultation like completely over again. I think there's got to be a point when we're like, we can just make an informed decision based on the information that we worked on from that neighborhood plan. And I feel like it is a very dangerous intersection, and every time I pull up to it, I feel like every driver there is like doesn't know who's supposed to go first. And while that might like ideally lead to everyone being a little bit more mindful, I just see it contributing to a lot of near misses. And I really wish that we could make a plan to address that area. And I think closing View Street even during the school hours, it would be something that I'd be interested in seeing advance. And when we hear from the Bayview community and from the school particularly, and we know that there's people working in that school who really didn't feel heard by the processes, and speaking with staff at length about it, I think that they're continuing to come to us because they feel like their concerns aren't being addressed. And I recognize that we have the active school transportation process, but to see that only 3 schools are identified for work in the next 3 years, that's really frustrating to me as well, because I feel like we should be able to do more in that time, but I recognize staff capacity is a thing, and if we need to bump up capacity, then maybe that's a conversation that we should be having as well, right? But yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Eastmere. I think there's a lot to be discussed. I do recognize that we do have some delegations, so maybe we can get them to present and then continue on. So could we have Kelsey Chandler and Kaylee Baker please come up to the podium? Thank you. Thanks. Yep, just come right up here. And just remind you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, Council, and committee members for the opportunity to speak today. Pedestrian and cyclist safety in the immediate vicinity of École Quarterway Elementary School is much more urgent than the staff report suggests. For years, parents and administrators have been asking for mobility safety improvements to the area adjacent to the school due to the high volume and speed of traffic on Bowen, East Wellington, and Townsite roads, and the congestion caused by lack of parking at the school. Most recently, the city applied for the Vision Zero grant for a proposed crosswalk on Townsite Road, which we have just learned was not successful. And we are here today to draw your attention to information that was mischaracterized or omitted from the report. We believe that a reanalysis of the extant data would show that this area is indeed a high priority for pedestrian improvements, and that there is a strong need for solutions to mitigate the high danger, not only to children, but to the many other users who rely on these mobility links. No one wants to see anyone have to dart between parked cars and onto a busy road to reach the sidewalk on the other side, as is currently the case. And just a quick note here, the italics on the slides indicate wording from the report, while any underlining is ours. Also, there's a little typo on here. We are not the second largest elementary school. We are the largest French immersion and out of catchment elementary school in SD 68. On the issue of pedestrian safety, the École Quarterway PAC Road Safety Committee represents the collective voice of approximately 800 parents and guardians at our school. We have conducted extensive engagement with parents, school staff, and neighboring businesses, and pedestrian accessibility, traffic congestion, parking conflicts, and children's safety are consistently major concerns of all stakeholders. The report states in more than one place that a lack of data precludes staff from making recommendations on the need for pedestrian improvements adjacent to École Quarterway, because until recently we did not have a breakdown of the scores of the requested crosswalk improvements. Our committee is not able to speak to the specifics of the scoring nor what the threshold for action is. However, the report's focus on the current score of the existing crosswalk also contradicts the later statement, which reads, higher scores represent higher priority and lower scores represent lower priority. However, it is important to acknowledge that these numbers are attention directing, not an explicit ranking. We believe that the recommendations put forward were the result of inconsistent application of the city's pedestrian prioritization tool, that there is already extensive data available, and that had a more comprehensive analysis of the area been provided, the need would be self-evident. Despite not having a defined catchment area, École Quarterway is situated at the intersection of the Brecon, Forest Park, and Fairview catchment areas. It is also situated in the center of one of 7 mobility hubs identified in the city's 2014 Transportation Master Plan, and in City Plan 2022, the area is designated as corridor and is immediately adjacent to a secondary urban center, which is the densely populated and serviced NRGH area. Townsite and East Wellington Road are both classified as mobility collectors, with East Wellington designated as a secondary active mobility route. As well, Bowen Road is an urban arterial and is a bus-frequent transit line that links central Nanaimo to downtown and the VIU area. In addition to the extensive data already available, the following is a list of other data that we have collected or are in the process of collecting to support prioritizing the need for improvements in the vicinity of the school. While there are currently no pedestrian facilities on the south side of Townsite Road, the staff report fails to mention that there is a city-registered right-of-way which crosses the Legion property at 1630 East Wellington Road. The existing crosswalk on East Wellington Road could be connected via this right-of-way to a new crosswalk across Townsite Road, and the Legion endorses this solution. The report states that pedestrian improvements could be identified as a priority through a future active schools travel process. However, as you've heard today, we've also been told that our school is at least 3 years away from any consideration. The report also concludes that because Quarterway is a commuter school with no defined catchment, it is anticipated that the potential for active travel to school is much lower here than at other schools. However, lack of a defined catchment does not preclude there from being high numbers of children in attendance who live within active travel distance, and this minor mapping exercise should not be a deterrent to making critical pedestrian improvements that benefit the broader community, not solely the children attending the school. We would also argue that because many families and staff travel from all areas of the city, this further enforces why it's essential that safe alternatives to traveling by car be provided for those for whom active travel is an option. The city's pedestrian prioritization tool has been selectively applied to the report recommendations, and we believe that a more consistent breakdown of each project be provided for full transparency around how these decisions were made. The intent of the pedestrian unallocated funds, based on the report, is to support more emerging and urgent priorities than what could be dealt with through the financial planning process and the active school travel process. The intent of these funds is not to supplement long-term city planning priorities, such as the 5th phase of the Albert 4th Complete Street multi-year project. We believe that Quarterway is a unique situation and that flexibility is required to address the pedestrian safety issues. We don't have years to find solutions. In light of the consequential shortcomings of the report as is, the École Quarterway Pac Road Safety Committee requests that the Governance and Priorities Committee take the information we have presented and reconsider the funding allocation. We also respectfully request that a revised report with a more consistent breakdown of recommendations be shared with our committee and with the school district. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Any questions from the committee? Mayor Crowe.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation. I must tell you, and I'm going to be quite candid, telling City Council that their staff haven't done their homework is not the best way to move your desires forward, but I won't dwell on that. Having said that, you indicate 13%, and that's based on information you've collected yourself, of the kids who attend Quarterway actually cycle or walk there themselves, correct?
That is correct.
And are there still crossing guards in place for the morning and afternoon drop-offs and pickups?
No, that's actually been canceled because students have come forward. They do not feel safe, and the principal has had to cancel that.
And in terms of the concern around this, it's obvious around accidents. Do you have any particular information you can share with council around accidents or incidents that have occurred where children or anyone's been injured in that particular crosswalk or area?
Well, we can refer to the ICBC crash data for the surrounding intersections. There's 42 crashes that occurred at Bowen in East Wellington and 3 at Townsite in East Wellington. You know, based on testimonial of children, staff, Legion staff, the principal, we see it every day. There's accidents waiting to happen. We've also worked closely with the Speedwatch team, the community policing officer, and they have sent out their team a number of times. They're working on building that data set. We did just hear back from them this morning, and they have some preliminary data for us of one of the, I'm not sure what they call the deployments. They found that 34% of people were speeding on the East Wellington route, and of those, 9% were considered extreme speed. So it is a very, very busy area. Bowen Road is a highway, basically. It's an extremely densely populated area that has grown exponentially in the last 5 years even. And, you know, there are some major gaps in the mobility network there. This does not just impact on our school, this impacts on the whole area.
And I appreciate the comments about the intersection and the dangers of it. Every intersection creates accidents. That's where accidents happen. But how are the improvements you're suggesting in terms of crosswalk some distance from the intersection going to, you're not suggesting that's going to improve the accident rate at the intersection itself? And if there are improvements to the intersection, what would you suggest? There's crosswalks there now, unless I'm mistaken. I'm looking at Mr. Sims, so perhaps you could explain that a little further for me.
Is this for the town site? There is no crosswalk. So every day I'm with my children, and we have to look both ways. And it's, you know, cars are using it to bypass East Wellington, so there's no safe way to go. The roundabout is very, very packed because we are out of catchment. So a lot of people do park on town site to alleviate that pressure. But again, now you're getting under your vehicle, there's no way to cross this road.
Thank you. And if I may, Chair, you're conscious of the process in terms of the recommendation. There's a committee of, well, I call it a committee, a meeting, a gathering, if you will, of representatives from ICBC, the school district, the RCMP, and the City of Nanaimo that meets regularly to discuss safety priorities within the city. And I'm just wondering what's your approach been to the school district who participates fully in that assessment process, and in terms of advice or recommendations, or you're working with them, what's their position on this? Because we're not getting that kind of a request, and we have to work with a process that relies on information, and I appreciate the advocacy. If I were a parent, I'd be up there with you. But having said that, in terms of allocating public resources, we have to know what are the priorities and why. And I'm just, if you can comment about the relationship with the school board and why this isn't something that, and I'm looking to Mr. Sims or Mr. Rose to be corrected, why they haven't raised that with us in the same way that they have with other school sites.
We're not entirely clear on the process of selection of schools at the school district level. We have been in conversations with the school district. They have been a part of these conversations with staff and with our committee. My understanding is that promises have already been made to other schools and that we are 3 years away and that there's no flexibility there. It is curious that of the schools that have been chosen to participate in this particular program, to date, they have all been located in the north end of Nanaimo. You know, there's not a school in the south end that's been chosen as of yet. So I'd be curious, very curious to know how Chase River and Cinnabar rank in comparison, how they have been chosen in advance of any of the other schools out there.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Great. Thank you. Councillor Armstrong?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation. We get them from just about every school and every pack. So one of the reasons I ask about the scores is because it is probably a fair system, so it doesn't become political, because it can become political very fast. When you talk about Chase River and Extension, there's no road where big trucks are going 50, 60 kilometers down there like that road. So that is a big concern for me, always has been. But again, it comes down to dollars. $300,000 doesn't buy you much sidewalk or very little crosswalks. And just another point, you know, and it's not a good point, but it's an accurate point, is that most of the fatalities occur on crosswalks. I don't know if you're aware of that, but the last 4 pedestrian fatalities were all on crosswalks. So that's something I'm always cognizant of. It doesn't necessarily make it safer sometimes. People assume it does, but it doesn't all the time. But for me, that's why I was concerned about having the numbers, because to me it's a way for me to make an informed decision based on facts. And I know you don't agree with some of the stuff that went into it, but there was a lot of work and a lot of time done that, and it's been used by other cities, and it's been proven to be very effective. So I just wanted to tell you that's why I rely on those forms, because it takes the politics out for me, because we've had Frank Ney here I don't know how many times, you know, talking about the speeding vehicles, and they don't even have a sidewalk, period. They walk on a very narrow road, part of the coming out of the north end. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Eastmere.
Thank you. I just want to. Thank you. Yeah, just want to thank you for your presentation and for the amount of advocacy and speaking to council. It sounds like the previous council was quite aware of the issues in this area, and it's been brought up a lot. So coming like new onto council and kind of hearing things for the first time, it's interesting to know it's been an ongoing conversation, and that is an extremely busy area. You're totally right about Bowen essentially being a highway. And I think, you know, to Mayor Krog's comments about coming and like suggesting that staff haven't done their homework, I don't think that's what you were doing, and I don't think that's what I'm doing when I'm asking questions about how things were calculated and how data gets interpreted. We're all just trying to better understand the process, and I think that it's never personal on these things, and we're all just trying to figure out how things get prioritized, and it does, I think, become a combination of like where you're hearing the most from people, the whole like squeaky wheel gets the grease thing, and I think that's why we brought in the process of using the numbers to determine, but then data isn't infallible, like it comes from somewhere, and just because you haven't had crashes doesn't mean that there hasn't been many near misses, so that doesn't get reflected in the data. So yeah, I appreciate you bringing this forward and asking about how all of this gets decided, because it's a really important piece for us to be able to think critically about our own processes. So yeah, thank you for this.
Thank you. And I just want to say that, you know, we did not know that Townsite would rank as high as it did until we saw these numbers today. So, you know, we just would we are asking for transparency around how these decisions are made and to compare apples and apples.
Totally. And I think that also comes back to sort of the point that you raised around the intent of the pedestrian unallocated funds, where it is sort of a council discretion thing, and we're trying to be able to have the flexibility to address the things that we see coming up as priorities that may not necessarily be exactly what the prioritization list says, but that's why you have a council and you don't have like AI running all of the decisions for the city. Like it's, yeah, that's part of why we're here, and I appreciate us as a council having the flexibility to make some of these decisions, so thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Sims?
Thanks, Chair. Just briefly on the transparency piece, on the city's website under transportation and mobility, there's an entire page called walking. And so it has quite a list of details of all of the factors that go into how we prioritize crosswalks and so on. And I'll just briefly touch on them. Crosswalk scores are based on the following risk factors: posted speed limit, volume of vehicles traveling on the road, that's purely observed data, it's not an opinion, collision history, length of the pedestrian crossing, and then there's sort of in the neighborhood, there's the trip generation factors, which I'll read again. So within or near a city center as designated in city plans, so our urban nodes. The walk score, a proximity to a transit stop, plus the usage levels, and equity analysis, as Mr. Rose referred to earlier, and proximity to a school. So you can see that the proximity to a transit stop, proximity to a school, those sorts of, and the volume of vehicles traveling on the road, those would drive a school or a score higher for, say, Townside or East Wellington. But perhaps, I'm just sort of spitballing, but perhaps the length of the pedestrian crossing didn't score so high as other schools. So I just wanted to put that out there. So the information is there, and we're trying to make it as open and as transparent as possible. Thank you.
Is it okay if I just make a comment about the transparency? I think one thing that we're a bit frustrated about is transparency with the AST. You know, we've made many calls to the district and have been talking to the city, but because we're considered out of catchment, we're low priority. And that's really frustrating. I don't know if you want to speak to that at all.
Yeah, I mean, we're just kind of in this strange space where we're never going to be a priority under the Active Schools Plan, but there are very, very real issues here. It is a very busy inner city school. You know, how do we get chosen, I guess is the question, because we've been asking these questions for a long time, and we seem no closer to it. So we just don't know how to proceed from here, because, like I say, these are very real concerns, and it is only a matter of time before there is a serious accident. So what can we be doing? This is not just us as parents concerned, this is a broader community concern.
Great. Well, I really appreciate you coming forward and presenting. I think Mr. Rose, did you want to respond to that?
Sorry, yeah, I was just going to jump in and highlight that there is not a selection process. It is does anybody want to participate? In 2017, in September, we called every single school in the city, and not a single one was interested in participating in an active school travel plan. We then got into conversations about openings and closings of schools and started going through that process through the active school travel lens. Since then, the dominoes have started falling, and we actually started our first conversation with Chase River Elementary about 5 years ago. And so we're now just getting to that point. So, you know, I can't understate the importance of these conversations, but I also have to acknowledge the amount of time and effort that goes into them. And we've tried bringing outside support in to try and expedite this. It's helped a little bit, but there's still a lot of local representation either from the city or from the school district that has to be part of that conversation. And so it's really unfortunate, but they take time to go through. And so there is no sort of magic point getter. It's just first come, first serve, and we're still working our way through the list.
Great, thank you. Just recognizing there is another delegation to come speak, and we've got to get through some. I think this has brought up a lot to be discussed, and just to your question, I think it is really important that you came here tonight. I think, you know, there is very objective factors that we evaluate intersections, but we also rely on subjective data and experience from the community, and this is part of the process of bringing it forward. And I think that advocacy is critical. That's why we have a Governance and Priorities Committee for you to come forward, and I think what you've shared tonight has been heard, and will be taken into consideration as we move forward. And I think there's many things that we need to discuss sort of on processes and the prioritization process and the amount of resources that we have to deal with these type of things, which is an ongoing and complex thing. But thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Great. Could I have Barry Lysing come down? Welcome, sir. Good to see you. 5 minutes.
Thank you. Barry Lysing from Stevenson Point Neighborhood Association. And thank you for your time on this. In February 2024, the Integrated Action Plan tracking sheets, SPNA, Stevenson Point, was told to expect an update regarding our #1 priority, which is pedestrian improvements, mobility improvements on Hammond Bay Road. In late April, Stevenson Point was told that this update was going to be in the form of this report to GPC. So in that vein, Stevenson Point wishes to clarify that the report as it pertains to Hammond Bay Road mobility improvements doesn't necessarily reflect either Stevenson Point's efforts since at least 2015, where we dropped asking for sidewalks, crosswalks, anything of that sort. It doesn't reflect Stevenson Point's very specific action that was requested and agreed to in the 2023 Council Neighborhood Association engagement, and that was narrowing of the southbound lane so that as much or whatever additional pavement as possible could be allocated to the use for pedestrians. We were hoping not to touch the center line. We were hoping not to touch the northbound. It also appears that the focus in the report, it focuses on issues that appear to lie primarily within a 700 meter portion of Hammond Bay Road that does not fall within Stevenson Point boundary. So Stevenson Point's concern is that this report distracts and confuses what Council accepted as our priority in 2023. And it may incorrectly imply that the legitimate factors inhibiting pedestrian mobility improvements beyond our boundary, whether they actually exist in the 1.3 kilometers within our boundary. Planning staff have encouraged all neighborhood associations to be targeted, actionable, and specific in their requests under the new community engagement process. We were hoping that the report would reflect that as well. In that vein, Stevenson Point would like to ask staff questions through GPC, or if GPC would prefer to defer acceptance of at least this portion of the report, we were hoping to have discussions with staff separately. In anticipation of this report, Stevenson Point Neighborhood Association scheduled a residents meeting for May 18th so that we can inform residents of the report's impact on the priorities and actions that they wish us to present to Council on May 22nd. It's a very short turnaround time. So any meeting we have with staff, we would appreciate if it can happen before May 17th so we can prepare that presentation to our residents. If GBC accepts this portion of the report, it does so regarding an action that was not requested by residents or the Stevenson Point Neighborhood Association. And we're hoping that any answers to our questions would be valuable in focusing residents' expectations and requests going forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lysing. And do we have any questions from the committee? Councillor Armstrong, and then we have some councillors
Thank you. So just to refresh my mind, what is your number one priority from?
Number one priority was pedestrian mobility improvements.
On which
along
street, sir?
Hammond Bay Road. And specifically, we asked for, as an action, along the southbound lane only, because that's where the majority of sidewalk is right now. And we were hoping just to improve the pavement connection between those sidewalk sections.
Thank you. I'll have to go look at that because I can't recall it right now. Thanks.
Councillor Hemmons?
Thank you. Actually, it's a question for staff, so I don't know if others have questions for the delegation.
Any more questions for the delegation? Okay. Oh, Councillor Eastmer?
Thank you. Since the neighborhood association meeting in 2023, have you heard anything from city staff about traffic or pedestrian improvements in?
The first update we had was in February.
And what form did that update take?
The form was that the white line proposal was problematic, that it would only be done if the white lines were shown to be worn. We didn't know what the criteria was for determining worn white lines, and we decided that we would wait until the 2024 council engagement with neighborhood associations to really tackle that.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you.
Stop, okay. Okay, Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Chair, and for Mr. Lysing. Sorry, I just want to clarify, you had indication from staff that your priority would go forward, that it was.
Well, it was approved by council, and then we've just been waiting to see what the process was.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lysing. Appreciate you coming
Thank
today.
you.
And Councillor Hemmons, you had a question for staff?
Yeah, thanks. Can I just have some more information on the approved by council? What was approved, and did we have a funding earmarked for it, and where was that coming from?
Sorry, through the chair. My understanding from the neighborhood conversations was that the transportation would review road markings as part of regular maintenance. Oh, sorry. The transportation department would review road markings as part of regular maintenance with the objective of narrowing travel lanes to accommodate a pedestrian corridor. The focus was on the southbound side. The notation is between Prince John Way and Chinook Road, which I acknowledge we did look beyond that all the way to Lagoon Drive, but also acknowledge that there already is a shoulder from Prince John to the biological station. And so what we found was that to renew the markings would be quite economical, but the problem was we could not accommodate an acceptable lane width that would provide any sort of pedestrian facility. And so this is when we came to the conclusion that if we were to provide any sort of pedestrian facility that we could fundamentally accept, we would need to eradicate the center line and shrink the medians or move the center lines to accommodate more space. And so this is where we came to the conclusion this was going to be quite a bit more expensive than just an operating budget renewal.
So then if I may, just for clarity, the neighborhood association approached us. We said, yes, we can look at this in the normal course of our work. We evaluated it. It didn't work. And now the neighborhood still thinks it's on the work plan, but we know that different.
I think that this is the conversation reporting back on what the review was and what took place and what our findings were. And with the additional layer that we do know that the road will be ripped up in a fairly short period of time.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, if I can just
Yep.
just sort of round out the question a little, or round out the answer. You'll recall that the neighborhood association meeting that the delegation referred to was a year ago, and it was to provide the priorities of each neighborhood association for the city to work on and consider as part of the integrated action plan. So this particular item of work acknowledged, and it was brought into and that's where it was approved by council or endorsed by council, was part of that integrated action plan. over the course of last year. So that's how it got in there. That's, you know, so we're considering it as one of their priorities, and we're certainly sensitive to the challenge and the long-standing interest on improving pedestrian access along Hammond Bay. But that's how it's sort of been lodged in. As Mr. Rose indicated, the original hope was that we'd be able to do it on a relatively simple, you know, just a restriping exercise, but you can't just do part of it. I guess that's the challenge that we ran into.
If I may just follow up there, thank you for that. And part of my rationale for questioning was that I was at that community meeting and I don't we didn't approve anything. That wasn't the point of that meeting, and we weren't having a formal council meeting, so approval wouldn't have been appropriate. But what we did do is we said to the neighborhoods, here are your top 3, and we're going to embed them in the IAP. We've now evaluated the top choice of this community association and determined that without other capital works, the project is probably not very feasible. So what I'm hearing is that we should communicate that back to the neighborhood. And perhaps the next community association is the right timeline for that, but I'm just hearing a bit of a gap there. So thank you for hearing that.
Thank you. Yeah, that would be interesting for the May 22nd meeting, is report back to the community associations about their requests and the AAP and what's been actioned and not actioned as an update to start the second round of discussions. Did you want to follow up on that, Mr. Sims, and then we'll go to Mayor Krogh?
No, I think you, Chair, that's exactly the intent, and as Councillor Hemmons outlined, and I would like to reiterate, it's not, staff are very supportive of trying to do something here. We recognize that Hammond Bay is really problematic for active transportation, and so it's not that we're saying, oh, we don't think we can do this. We just need to be able to do it in a different context. And the different context is the relatively recent insertion of the Hammond Bay trunk main by the regional district, which is creating the complication as well.
Right. Thank you. And is it worth $100K to make these improvements for 2 years when in 2 years we're going to have to do it again? And I think that ultimately comes down to just how much resources we have to mobilize in the next little while. Mayor Krogh.
Thank you, Chair. 2 things. Firstly, I note we had a scheduled break at 3 o'clock. Staff may want to break, but secondly, I'm going to absent myself for 10 minutes. I have to go do a quick TV interview.
Great. I think this might be a good opportunity to have our break, and then we'll come back for more discussion on this item. Yeah, we'll return at 3:30. Thank you.
Hey, Tiana.
Hey.
It sure is the coldest rink in town.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, buddy!
Nice save, James!
Wow, your goalie is keeping you guys in the game. Cheers.
Oh, man, that's hot.
Sorry, that's the way I like it. Oh.
Go, 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 go!
Penalty shot!
Scalds from hot drinks are a leading cause of hospitalization for children under 5.
2 minutes, stand in the front, unsportsmanlike conduct.
Hot tea and coffee will cause serious burns to a child in less than a second.
Got it, kid? Use the lid.
What we have here is the Real Ice technology that was installed at the Nanaimo Ice Center. It allows us to use cold water from traditionally hot water that we used to use for making ice. Basically, the water will come in through the bottom, go in through a vortex idea, making the air bubbles microscopic in size, which makes a better, more dense sheet of ice.
Differences that you'll see with the Real Ice is there's less snow developed, so that's easier for cleaning, and also it's a denser, harder, clear ice. So the ice skaters will certainly enjoy that. And the city plans to implement Real Ice at our other 2 arenas as well. Some of the other efficiencies we've implemented in this facility are LED lights in some areas, and we've also, in the last few years, installed a higher efficiency refrigeration system, which lowers our energy costs. Both Zambonis at our facility are now electrically operated, so there's no harmful emissions, and they're very quiet as well. So what this means for the city is that we're able to use less energy and also reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions, which is more beneficial to the environment.
We're here at Bruce and Dundas. Somebody's stolen the street names that were here, so we're here to replace them. Our sign shop has just generated us 2 signs, so I'm going to go through the process of putting it together and reinstalling the street names. First thing, we got to center the signs. We do everything on this truck. We've got all the equipment on here to build, install, remove, repair, whether it's street signs, street names, posts, banners, Christmas decorations, and so forth. I'm going to basically just put the sign in the brackets, and we'll be doing both signs, of course. So I've got a cross bracket that I'm going to put in, and then add the top sign, which is this street we're on, Dundas. Sorry, do the same there. We put the street that we're coming up to on the bottom, so they all basically have the same. The cross street will be on the top. We got to put some bolts in to secure them so nobody will steal the street name. We're ready to go. Just put this back and we'll go out and install this where the missing one is. Every year we do what we call a stop sign survey, where we go around and check all the stops. We clean them, make sure they're in the right spots, in good condition, not bent, and we also clean the street names, make sure they're good. As we're doing that, if there's ones that we decide we want to replace, we do that at that time. This year we're looking at approximately about 120 sets. It's very expensive to do, but we're continually, weekly changing street names because of either them getting damaged or people breaking them and taking them. So I'll put this on, and then I put a bolt through to secure it to the post. There we go. And that's good, we're done. Dundas and Bruce Ave are now ready to go.
Welcome to the city's South Fork Water Treatment Plant. This is where we take water that we would collect in our lakes and rivers, pipe it, we filter it and treat it before we send it off to the city's distribution system in your taps. This facility actually does a better job than most home filtration systems. The water that comes into your home that you use every day, that you bathe in every day, that you wash your clothes in every day, is cleaner than anything you can get anywhere.
Here you see filtration in action. It's kind of like watching paint dry. There's nothing to really see. But if you look in the tank, you'll see the froth on the top. That's dissolved organic matter, and when we aerate the tank, that froths up, and that's why that's up there.
We take all the little particles, all the organic matter, any insects or bugs that might be in the water, and pathogens that we're trying to filter out, they're all gone. We filter the water using a series of membranes.
So what we're looking at here is a membrane filtration module. So when I talk about the membranes filtering the water, this is what we're filtering the water with. And while you might think that the water flows through like the baleen of a whale, it's not true. These are hollow fiber membranes. So each of these little tiny strands are hollow, just like a shoelace. And the membrane is wrapped around the outside of these tiny little hollow fibers. So these sit in a bath of water, raw water, and then we pull the water through the wall of the straw or the shoelace, and then it travels along and it collects in this vessel at the end here. And this hole at the end is where we pull the water out.
And the membranes are like an almost impermeable waterproof layer that we pull the water through. So now we're just left with clean, pure drinking water. Take care.
Okay, I'd like to call the meeting back from recess. And we can open up for some discussion and entertain some possible motions. So any questions, more questions from the committee to staff? I've got Councillor Eastmere and then Mayor Croak. Councillor Eastmere.
So on the list for the items where it requires consultation with MODI, is there a way that council can help advance those items and prompt those conversations to happen? Because I think specifically like the Nickel and Needham crossing, I think that's one that we've heard a lot about. Is there any way that we could send a letter to MODI and request that they come to a meeting? I'm just wondering, like, I don't want to entirely circumvent the process, but maybe we need to if it's causing us to constantly have it on a list as, you know, can't do it because it requires consultation.
I think, sorry, through the chair, I think that Nickel and Needham in particular is quite challenging because it's one intersection on the corridor. And so, unfortunately, it's one of the first ones coming out of a very highway-oriented format, which really kind of leaves drivers with this sort of perception that they're still on a highway, and that's the first one to sort of slow them down and take them down to an urban behavior. And so, I'll be perfectly honest, I'm not actually sure what solutions could be applied at that intersection to make any headway. Unfortunately, I think it's very much a corridor-based approach that needs to be, you know, we need to look at it and sort of say, okay, how do we make this a more urban corridor? And so I think that because of the extensiveness of that potential solution, that becomes almost a project unto itself. And so that's where there's an opportunity for a more broad engagement strategy, which council could weigh in on at that point in time and say, you know, we want to see this corridor more in line with an urban arterial as opposed to a numbered highway. So.
Okay, well, I would like to see it more in line with a community corridor and not a highway. And I think if it is sort of the first intersection that drivers are encountering, then that warrants that sort of special attention. Do you think that the amount of development that's happening along Nickel, the new proposed fairly large buildings, could that prompt MODI to take a more serious approach?
I think that the ongoing development does continue to kind of bring it forward. I think one of the challenges, though, is the overall nature of it being the Trans-Canada Highway. Mm-hmm. So it is sort of a system that's at odds. And I mean, I know that my counterpart at the ministry and I have had lengthy conversations about, you know, what does our community really want out of this system and how do we reconcile that between our agencies. And so I think I certainly appreciate the motivation and the encouragement. So I think that right now it's probably better to stay the course and kind of create a situation where we can come back and request support or something of that nature.
Okay, and when you say better to stay the course,
keep the staff level conversations going on and see if we can continue to make some headway.
Okay, well, you let us know when you want us to get super loud about it, because I'm ready to do that, and I think that there's a lot of appetite from the community, especially given like the crossing guard who was hit in that intersection, and it's a dangerous one. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eastmere. Mayor Croak.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I appreciate Councillor Eastmere's willingness to advocate on behalf of this, but on behalf of all those people who drive that corridor regularly and being conscious of the fact that every intersection creates an accident hazard. That's how accidents happen. They generally don't happen straight stretches. Just to go back and emphasize again, Mr. Rose, if you can, what could you possibly do to slow down traffic on that stretch of road apart from perhaps narrowing it to one lane each way?
I think narrowing it, maybe not reducing number of, but reducing width of, but I know how the consensus is on that. So I can't honestly tell you what an obvious solution is, which kind of leads to the conundrum we're sitting in.
Thank you. And a second question, a different matter. With respect to the recommended motion, which isn't on the table, I gather, at this point, the improvements on Albert, that would follow logically from what was to be a hoped-for increase in pedestrian and cycling use on Albert Street as a result of our vote to expend the monies on the curve, et cetera, at the top, and also taking into account the improved intersection near the Superette store. Is that fair to say that this follows logically because of that?
I think the continued improvements down the corridor help finalize that link, yes.
Chair, unless you have a number of questions, and I won't make the recommended motion, but if you don't have a bunch of questioners, I'm going to move the recommended motion in terms of the Governance Priorities Committee recommend that Council allocate 300,000, et cetera.
Motion has been moved. Is there a seconder? Councillor Armstrong. Discussion. Councillor Armstrong, unless you wanted to speak to it more, Mr. Grove?
I will only. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I appreciate all the concerns and the lobbying we receive from various groups concerned about their neighborhoods and areas, and that's appropriate. Things often happen that way. But when it comes to traffic safety, my inclination generally is to rely on what staff recommend. They're the ones who deal with it every day, and we also need to be conscious of the fact that we have an overworked staff in our transportation department, and that needs to be publicly acknowledged, and yet we're just about to receive, I'm sure, a number of complaints around increasing taxes this year. But the reality is, if we want to see I won't call it a faster turnaround, but more emphasis on this, then we have to be prepared to support the staff, and it doesn't appear we're prepared to do that. So having said that, when staff with the expertise make this kind of recommendation and can comment on and speak thoughtfully about all the other potential proposals, my inclination is to support them, particularly given this council's emphasis on upgrading that corridor from University to downtown, which is what we voted on some time ago. So having said that, I would hope that council will support what has been recommended in terms of the Albert Street crossings. And I must say, in terms of pedestrians, as we know, with a number of the individuals in our downtown going back and forth to the overdose site, et cetera, to the safe injection site, there are a number of individuals crossing Albert Street who are, how shall I say, as kindly as I can, not often cognizant of the dangers, and the presence of and more emphasis on safe crossing on that particular stretch of road, I think is the interest of public safety and in the interest of some of our most vulnerable citizens. So I'm happy to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. Just to Councillor Easter's point earlier, I think she has to realize that Modi's whole goal is to move vehicles faster. It's not about pedestrians, so that's something where we're going to have to be in conflict of. So I know that's their goal because I've been involved with them for many years, and it's about getting traffic going, flowing, not slowing it down, especially as there's a lot of big trucks use that. I don't see narrowing would make that road safer. Actually, it would make it more dangerous. But to the point at hand, I'm struggling with this one because I also see the 3rd Street East sidewalk is very important for me. Especially with the, like all the stadium district, all the people going there, there's a lot of people, a lot of vehicles use that 3rd Street because that's the main road out to the parkway. So I'm caught between the two, so I'm not sure which way I'm going to go. Like, but I am going to try and stick with the fact that we used this system for a reason, and that was to take politics out of the game and in the lobbying, so that we're using a measured approach to do this. So I noticed that's high on the score too, not quite as high, so I'll be convinced either direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree with the comments of Councillor Armstrong in terms of 3rd Street being of interest to me, but I'm inclined to support the recommendation mainly because we have, over the course of some years now, developed a process which is an unbiased, professional approach to determining where our priorities lie. And this topic always brings forward groups that want to advocate for their neighborhood, and good for them, and I don't blame them. But they look at it through their neighborhood lens only, and I think it's really important that this is not a political decision, that we don't play one neighborhood against the other. This is an unbiased approach, and it might not be perfect, but I think it's the best we've got. And I rely on the professionalism of our staff to give us good advice in this regard. I do have one question through the chair to Mr. Rose, and that is regarding the Albert Street crossings. The report references raised crosswalk and bump outs at Selby Street. Will those bump outs have an impact on the flow of vehicle traffic?
Through the chair, they should not have any sort of unexpected impacts on it. No, it'll be not unlike some of the other ones that we've used around the city. So we will, it does shorten the crossing distance, but it shouldn't have any negative impacts on vehicles.
Okay, thank you very much. Because unlike some of my fellow councillors, I am adamantly opposed to further narrowing, restricting roadways, and further congesting vehicle traffic. So I realize we're talking about pedestrians today, and back to that. So I think I will support the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe. Councillor Eastmere.
Thank you. If I could just ask a question through staff regarding the École Quarterway Elementary request for flashing lights at the existing crossing of East Wellington Road in front of the school. Do we have an estimate on how much that would cost?
I don't have a current estimate on hand. Recently, I believe they've been somewhere between $30,000 and $40,000, but that's going from memory. So.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I wish we did have that number for this discussion. I think what I'm feeling is that I spend a lot of time walking up and down Albert Street. It's got sidewalks on both sides, well-established crossings. Drivers are used to looking for pedestrians crossing at various parts of Albert Street. Putting that up against some of the potential improvements in schools and also on 3rd Street, like I think those for me rank as a higher priority than adding raised crosswalks on Albert Street at this point. So I can't support the recommendation at this time, just given how relatively little money we have for pedestrian unallocated projects. And I think that there's projects that we could do that would be closer to schools and in higher traffic areas that don't have sidewalks or safe crossings or lit crossings, where I think we would be better to spend our attention at this point. So I won't be supporting the Albert Street improvements. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eastmere. Councillor Hammonds.
Thank you, Chair. Speaking in support of the recommendation, I think what I'm taking away from this conversation, and I take it away every year, is that we just don't have enough time, resources, staff to do everything we want to do. It's just impossible. So to that, I support Mayor Krog's comments that we have a process in place to do this strategically. Albert Street was part of a larger, I think, vision to really draw folks from the university into the downtown core. It's about economic development, it's about downtown revitalization. So council has absolutely invested in that corridor, I think with very good reason, and I think it would be well positioned of us to complete that project. I like the tie-ins to the transit exchange. Yeah, the 3rd Street, to Councillor Armstrong's point, I totally get it. It's a gap, but I also don't know where those folks will be walking to. I'd like to get sidewalks everywhere, but if you know, if we're I use that all the time. I'm at that stadium all the time. Folks are walking, there's one development and then the highway. So in terms of pedestrian numbers, I don't see it ranking nearly as high as Albert Street. And I think I'll just leave it there. I'm in support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hemmons. Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Chair. Clearly, we need some more funds because there's a lot of needs in this community in terms of walking and sidewalks and pedestrian safety. And I appreciate the delegations coming today to express their concerns, and previous delegations to coming forward and talking about the needs in their neighborhoods. And I do appreciate those concerns. I also appreciate the comments of Mayor Krogh that staff has spent a lot of time already working on these and has a methodology for determining what our priorities should be. And I appreciate Councillor Armstrong's point that this shouldn't be political and we shouldn't be out advocating for areas that are in in our own neighborhoods. Quarterway is in my neighborhood, and I do drive around that area quite often, and I see what the concerns are that the parents have, and I also get the point that we could spread this money out a little bit farther by doing crosswalk lights or more minor improvements in some areas that might create more safety. But I also appreciate getting the 4th Avenue connection with downtown and University completed, and I think that that's a good project to just finish off and move forward on. So with that, I think I will stick with the staff recommendation and just thank the staff for the work that you've put into this, and appreciate the fact that we do not have enough funds to go around. These are not easy decisions to make, and we also don't have enough staff to do everything that we need to do in this long, spread out, sprawling city that was a bunch of communities amalgamated together. We're not a grid like Vancouver, where it would be much easier to deal with a lot of these things than the current configuration of the city of Nanaimo. So, thank you.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. I forgot to ask this question. I've been approached by a few first responders from all groups concerned about the bump outs because they're finding it very difficult to get around them, especially the big fire trucks. So I've heard from them. I've also heard about the raised crosswalks on Albert Street, and I remember Chief Fry was concerned about that when it was brought about. Has this been brought up with ambulance, fire, and police for their comments on it? Because that is a major road, and I mean, every 60 seconds delayed could mean somebody's life, especially with the overdoses happening down there.
So through the chair, these are ongoing conversations. So every time we look at an intersection for a change, we are talking to our first responders, and we don't proceed if they're not supportive of it. So
was the ambulance, because when I spoke to the ambulance, they say they're never consulted. So I just want to make sure that they are, and the same thing with the police. So I always hear it's only the fire department.
Through the chair, we do try. Our responses are not consistent from ambulance, so it can be challenging at times. So we persevere as hard as we can.
That is my big concern, because I know it really does slow down, and I know I've talked to numerous drivers of the fire trucks that don't like the narrowed roads because they're struggling to get to calls sometimes, because it is really impacting their times. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a few comments before we go to the vote. You don't get to speak as much when you're chair. It's difficult sometimes. I think just hearing from the different presenters and in general, I do feel that the amount of resources we are allocating to pedestrian improvements is limited. And I understand that there has been some staffing capacity challenges in that area just to keep up with the the requests thus far, and that's my one question is how is that staffing capacity challenge? Are we filling those roles, and is it still something that we're struggling with?
Perhaps I'll take that one, Chair. I think you're exactly right, and we've talked about the capacity problems that staff have had a number of times over the last few years, and those continue. I'll be quite honest, but I think it's also not only just transportation, although that seems to be a real challenge, but it's many of the technical positions, whether it be in planning or engineering or operations as well. We're finding challenges attracting or keeping staff because there's such a burgeoning job market for specialized technical work. So it's still, you know, you could approve another position in transportation today and it might not get filled. In fact, we've got a couple of vacancies in that department already. It's a frustration on all our parts as well, but I do note that it is across the organization.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Like, I think that is a challenge, and I do think that where we're allocating resources is still indicative of potentially coming from a more car-centered, orientation, despite our best intentions. And how do we make it so that we are attracting the positions that we do have vacant? In addition, do we need to look at improving sort of the resource and we do have in this? And I do recall a recent vote that council had about increasing the amount of money, I think it was like a % tax increase to road improvements, from improving the road quality from 71% to 78%. And in my time in the last 5 years on council, I've not had anybody come to the council table or, received an email about the quality of our roads, but there are legions of people always complaining about the pedestrian amenities and improvements and safety. And so I think that's something that we do really need to take serious stock of, and something that, if there is appetite and intention, that council can bring back forward, looking at sort of the allocation of those resources. Just in terms of safety and road width, when I look at the picture of Quarterway, that's a huge, I think it's town site, but that's a huge width of road that almost looks like you have 4 lanes in there, and that can be pretty intimidating to cross. And I think this narrowing of the roads, when I look at Parkway Avenue, I often run with a child buggy on Parkway, and because there's no even painted line for the shoulder of the road, it's sketchy. You don't know exactly where the cars are going and that, and just having that additional separation, even if it's just signaled with paint, can make a big difference. And I think you can get a lot of mileage and bang for your buck by putting some more paint on the roads and doing that. And I think I don't want to give the impression in the discussions that this council is against narrowing the roads and we want to avoid that because it's contention, because I do think if it came down to a vote, there's probably a majority that would want to see narrower roads where we can do it, and I'd be willing to put that forward if it's necessary to send a clear message, because I think that is one way that you can slow down traffic, and it does increase the perception of safety, and have a myriad of different, and I think that's well documented. In terms of the Albert Street, I do have a question. Does that include, like, if we approve this, does it include sort of the finalization of the bicycle lane down either side, or has that sort of been already done or in part done or not really part of these crossings?
So through the chair, when we go through the actual detailed design, we're going to look and see what can be accommodated. To optimize money, we're not going to be making significant changes to the current curb lines, so we're not going to rip out one curb and move it 2 feet over to accommodate that. So we'll have to look and see how much space we can get out of it, and if we can, we'll prioritize an uphill cycling facility, because generally speaking, downhill cyclists will be with traffic and be able to maintain a consistent speed. So as we start to put the pieces together, we'll have a better understanding of what we can accommodate, but we're going to do our best to support all the modes of transportation.
Great, because I do accept the, you know, the argument that we put on all this money up for the whole Albert Street corridor, that the cycling facility is a large part of that, and a large investment that we did higher up on there, and to sort of have that included sort of in the final little stretch there into the down, I think is important. So with those comments, I'm not seeing any, I do have more things popped up. Councillor Armstrong, Councillor Eastmer, do you have any more things to say? Great, we'll call the question.
I just wonder, like, is there an opportunity to pick one of these crossings on Albert Street and then include one of the other potential listed items, like the flashing crosswalk sign at Quarterway? Like, I'm just frustrated that we're about to spend almost $500,000 on 2 crosswalks on Albert Street. It doesn't seem like an equitable expenditure given like the number of projects we have. Like, I feel like knocking one of those off could potentially make the entire street safer, and then we use some of the money for something else. I just think it's like $500,000 for two crosswalks in Albert. It's not making sense to me.
Just yeah, can staff answer that? And I am curious, you know, is that all that money just for the, you know, perpendicular crossing, or does that include sort of like corridor work as well?
So it wouldn't just be 2 crossings, it would be wherever we can improve a crossing on Albert Street so that we create a more complete corridor as opposed to having 1 or 2. So Dunsmuir and Selby, thank you, are the 2 marked ones right now, but it gives us the opportunity to also look at Prideaux and potentially at the Superette as well to address some of the transit stop. With the previous phase, we weren't able to do a complete transit stop in front of the Superette, so we could also look at that as well. So that would be the objective of this task.
Okay, I think maybe the way that it's listed as the recommended project and it gives the 2 crossings with the points, like maybe that's why I'm focused on it being 2 particular crossings, but I'll also note, like in the recommendation, it says that the areas within the Pauline Harrer catchment, and it's just that the Pauline Harrer doesn't have a catchment. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you for those comments. I'm not seeing any other speakers. Yeah, I do struggle with allocation. I think we're working within a context where it's just very limited funding and resourcing. And so I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? And motion carried. That brings us to the last item, question period. And Ms. Gurry. No questions. Motion to adjourn. Mayor Krogh, Councillor Armstrong, all in favor?